With Chun Si leading the charge, Chung Hua couldn't help but follow. Kill Xiao Ran, seize the car, and they'd have a way out. Go! Xiao Ran merely smiled, no longer concealing his ability. Ouch! Chung Hua and Chun Si cried out in pain simultaneously, for they had somehow crashed into a stone. Crashed into a stone? Indoors. You're telling me I crashed into a stone? Who would believe that? Chung Hua and Chun Si stared, dumbfounded, at the large stone in front of them, as if they'd seen a ghost. They even reached out and touched it. Cold solid. It was indeed a stone. But how was that possible? How could a large stone suddenly appear out of nowhere in the house? They looked at each other, then over the stone to Xiao Ran, their expressions a mix of bewilderment and fear. Was it you? Chung Hua, reacting slightly faster, asked Xiao Ran with a trembling voice. That's right, it was me. Xiao Ran pressed his hand, and the large stone vanished into thin air. He calmly sat down. Then a table began to appear before him. On the table, out of nowhere materialized some snacks, a cup of warm milk, and a handgun. This utterly dumbfounded Chung Hua and Chun Si. Why you? How is this possible? Chung Hua shrieked. It was as if they were dreaming. This is called an ability. You can call it a superpower or a special ability, whatever you like, Xiao Ran explained. Chun Si's eyes lit up. You can conjure things out of thin air. That's right. Xiao Ran nodded. He didn't bother to explain that these things were actually prepared by him long ago, that he never produced items, but was merely a transporter of goods. But was there any need? Those who knew his secret were dead men walking. Dead men didn't need such detailed explanations. Chun Si was visibly tempted, saying, How about I follow you? Look at me. I'm quite a beauty, aren't I? And I'm very good in bed. You can ask Chung Hua. Upon hearing this, Chung Hua's face immediately turned green. Why did this plot feel so familiar? Was she going to cuckold him again? No, Chun Si wasn't his wife. So what was there to cuckold? But she was the mother of his son. If she turned around and threw herself into Xiao Ran's arms, making his son call Xiao Ran Daddy, even if he died, his coffin lid wouldn't stay shut. This bitch, realizing that he, a rich second generation, was useless now, and seeing Xiao Ran's superpower, she immediately changed her allegiance and wanted to jump into Xiao Ran's embrace. Bitch, you deserve to die. Chung Hua glared at Chun Si, his eyes spitting fire. Xiao Ran, naturally, saw all this and added fuel to the fire. Kill Chung Hua, and I'll give you a chance. Instantly, Chun Si turned around, her gaze fiercely fixed on Chung Hua. Did she have feelings for Chung Hua? Haha, if you're talking about her desire to climb the social ladder and become Mrs. Chung, then yes, definitely. But to say she had any feelings for him? That was a joke. Expecting a mistress to have feelings? Of course. What she valued was only the Chung family's wealth. Becoming Mrs. Chung would allow her to frequent high-class events and become the envy of everyone. The problem was, none of that was possible now. It was the apocalypse. So, getting Chung Hua was merely an obsession. After killing Sun Jie, his wife, that obsession had been released. So, with just Xiao Ran's words, Chun Si unhesitatingly aimed her gun at Chung Hua. Of course, the handgun Xiao Ran had placed on the table also had a deterrent effect, accounting for at least 99% of her decision. Which modern person wasn't afraid of a gun? Chung Hua cursed inwardly, but Chun Si was truly insane, wasn't she? First, she stabbed her own husband, then finished off his wife with another blow. She was ruthless and heartless. Even though he was a man and she was a woman, he felt utterly powerless, a chill running straight through him. He dare not fight. What could he do? He glanced at the little boy nearby. A spark of an idea hit him. He rushed forward, grabbed the boy, and put him in a chokehold, shouting, Don't come any closer, or I'll kill him. At this, Chun Si's expression finally changed. Let him go, she shrieked. Drop the knife. Chung Hua yelled back. This was his last straw, his lifeline. Chun Si stared in disbelief. Are you even human? He's your son too. So what? Chung Hua said dismissively. Compared to my life, everything else can be put aside. Hurry up and drop that knife. Chun Si's hand, holding the knife, trembled. Suddenly, a look of intense fear appeared on her face. Quick, put our son down, he doesn't look right. Chun Si, don't play games with me, drop the knife. Chung Hua remained unmoved. Clang! Chun Si threw the knife down. Chung Hua also released the little boy. Chun Si immediately rushed over, picked up the child, crying and calling out, Son, my son. But the boy's limbs hung limp, motionless. Ah, Chun Si wailed. At this moment, Chung Hua quietly walked towards a discarded knife, carefully picked it up, then stealthily crept up behind Chun Si. One step, 2 steps, 3 steps, he was already behind her, raising the knife high in his hand. Chen-Si didn't notice, still wailing while clutching her son. Thud! With one downward thrust of the knife, blood splattered, and the wailing instantly ceased. Chen-Si twisted her head, looking at the savagely grinning Chonghua, a flash of venom in her eyes. Coughing blood, she gasped, "You truly are an animal." With that, she collapsed to her knees, dead, still clutching the boy in her arms. Chonghua snatched the boy, kicking Chen-Si away. "Give me back my son, you filthy bitch." But after taking the child, he was horrified to find that the boy had stopped breathing. His face was purple and black. Only then did Xiao Ran calmly say, "When you held your son hostage just now, if you had noticed his abnormality and immediately given him artificial respiration or CPR, he might still have been saved." Chonghua froze on the spot. "So, I personally kill my own son? No, absolutely not. Don't blame me, blame you." "Yes, you." Chonghua seemed to have found a target to shift his self-blame onto. Pointing at Xiao Ran, he said, "You noticed my son wasn't right much earlier. Why didn't you warn me? It was you killed him." Xiao Ran let out a laugh. "He's not my son, so why should I worry about it? Speaking of which, class monitor, you're truly vicious. Someone killed your wife, yet you sweet-talked your enemy, then turned around and took your son hostage, killing your mistress. TSK, TSK. You truly are a perfect scoundrel." Chonghua retorted loudly, his face not even flushing. "Everything I did was out of necessity, all to survive. It's the apocalypse, a natural disaster now. Wouldn't anyone do what I did?" "Xiao Ran, don't pretend to be so noble. If Zheng Jie were my flesh and blood, I would sacrifice my life for my son. But as for a fake son, forget it. Did he need to argue with a selfish scoundrel? Class monitor, thank you for playing with me for a few days. Now, it's time to send you on your way." Chonghua stared at Xiao Ran in disbelief, blurting out, "Didn't you just say that as long as Chen-Si and I killed each other, I could follow you?" Xiao Ran chuckled. "Is something wrong with your ears or your brain? I clearly told your mistress that. When did you get included in that? Besides, I just said it offhand. I didn't make a deal with your mistress." He was serious about making a deal, but as for casual remarks, he wasn't above lying. Seeing Xiao Ran reach for the gun on the table, Chonghua suddenly burst forth with astonishing strength, lunging at Xiao Ran. The desire to survive ignited immense courage within him. Then, he vanished without a trace, and a corpse appeared in the pocket dimension. The next moment, Xiao Ran tossed Chonghua's body out. Burying this family of 5 in one room seemed rather interesting. Xiao Ran smirked. "All right, after messing with someone's wife and then killing them, I've certainly vented some frustration." He walked out. Honestly, though, out of this family of 5, only Chonghua truly died by Xiao Ran's hand. At most, Xiao Ran simply fanned the flames, but the affair between Chonghua and Chen-Si and the child they had wasn't something he fabricated. Was telling the truth a crime? However, this way of killing without brute force, relying solely on words, was quite stimulating. It just required too much brain power and the right circumstances. For instance, if Chonghua and Chen-Si hadn't had an affair, or even if they had but no illegitimate child, the outcome definitely wouldn't have been like this. So, killing with my mind is too exhausting. I'll stick to violence, Xiao Ran thought as he reached the ground floor. Just then, a group of people blocked his path. Xiao Ran wasn't surprised at all, as he had activated his spatial perception after leaving Zhao Peng's house. Within a 10-meter radius, every detail was under his control. These were residents of the community, but they clearly had ill intentions, as each of them carried a weapon, cleavers, hammers, and so on. "You're the owner of that car outside, right?" one man said. He looked to be in his late 40s, a smug-looking fellow with gold-rimmed glasses. "So what if I am?" Xiao Ran retorted. "If so, please hand over your car keys," the bespectacled man said with a smile. "After all, we're all civilized people. We don't want to hurt anyone. But if you don't want to be civilized, we'll help you be civilized." In other words, they were robbing him. Xiao Ran chuckled. "You certainly are civilized, sugarcoating robbery like this. But robbery requires strength." He glanced around at the crowd and said, "I'm a very reasonable person. Retreat now, and I won't kill you. But the moment a fight breaks out, everyone who stays here will die." His last words were utterly chilling. Immediately, several people showed signs of fear. They had come to force Xiao Ran to hand over the car keys simply to get out and find supplies. What was their fundamental goal? To survive. So, if they lost their lives over a car, what would be the point? "What are you afraid of?" the bespectacled man said, clearly exasperated. "He's just one man. How many of us are there? Does he have a gun or something?" Right? If he doesn't have a gun, how can one person take on a whole group? Are you Ip Man or Wang Fei Hung? That's not necessarily true, Xiao Ran chuckled, calmly producing a pistol. Immediately, everyone involuntarily stumbled back a few steps. Who isn't afraid of gun? Damn it. The bespectacled man nearly slapped himself. Am I a jinx or something? I just said you didn't have a gun, and you pull one out to slap me in the face. Fear mixed with embarrassment. But he immediately retorted, one gun has at most 9 bullets. How many of us are there? His bullets will run out quickly. Besides, ask yourselves, how many more days can your family's food supplies last? If we don't fight now, we'll starve and die of thirst anyway. At this, those who were about to retreat regained some courage. They wouldn't run, but none of them wanted to step forward, fearing that the first bird to stick its head out would get shot. Who would take those 9 bullets? Go on, it's just a pistol, not a submachine gun. The bespectacled man waved his hand. Of course, he didn't want to be the one to sacrifice himself for justice. He wanted to incite everyone to act together, so the bullets wouldn't necessarily be aimed at him. Xiao Ran smiled. Very well, you asked for it. You wanted a melon, you got a melon. You wanted a beating, you got a beating. You wanted a machine gun, you got a machine gun. Then, a machine gun appeared in Xiao Ran's hand. His strength had now reached an enormous 1,000 gene, so holding the machine gun with one hand and the long magazine with the other was effortless, just like the classic Terminator pose. Damn it, the bespectacled man was utterly dumbfounded. You have a grudge against me, don't you? Every time I say you don't have something, you pull that exact thing out. But how did Xiao Ran do it? After all, this wasn't a magic show where Xiao Ran could prepare props beforehand. It was too bizarre. But more than that, it was terror, because that was a machine gun. If a pistol could only kill a single-digit number of people, and with poor accuracy, given their thick clothing, it might not even kill one person. But a machine gun was different. Pull the trigger, and bullets would pour out like a tide, mowing down a large swathe of people. Everyone was so terrified their minds went blank. They had no time to ponder how Xiao Ran had conjured a machine gun out of thin air. Goodbye, Xiao Ran said calmly. Rat-a-tat-tat. The machine gun began to spit out fire. Bullets poured forth. Immediately, the crowd devolved into chaos, scrambling to escape. In their panic, no one noticed that the machine gun hadn't actually hit many people. Instead, those who were fleeing had strangely vanished. Finally, dozens of people dwindled to 7. They knelt on the ground, trembling. Spare us. We didn't attack you. Mercy. These few only knew how to beg for their lives. Xiao Ran shook his head. I said that those who left earlier could live. You didn't leave. Although you didn't make a move, you were clearly fence-sitters. If my keys had been stolen, you would have enjoyed the fruits of that victory. The faces of the 7 men turned ashen, because that was exactly what they had been thinking. Let's fight, one man exclaimed, charging at Xiao Ran first. If it didn't fight, Xiao Ran wouldn't spare them anyway. However, the moment he moved, he vanished, disappearing into thin air, as if he had never existed. This utterly terrified the 6 others who had been contemplating a move. One even wet himself. Xiao Ran chuckled. Come on, don't just stand there gawking. But who dared to move? Xiao Ran shook his head, swapped his weapon for a pistol, and fired. Bang! One man's forehead burst open, and he dropped dead on the spot. The remaining 5 panicked again, scrambling to their feet and running. Then, they collectively vanished. Xiao Ran checked with his spatial perception again. There wasn't a single living person within at least 10 meters. These people dared to try and steal his car keys. They were destined for a dead end. Xiao Ran had still given them a chance, but they hadn't taken it. And after seeing him use his spatial abilities, did they still think they could survive? Dream on. All right, time to go home. Xiao Ran returned home. A warm, comfortable home, and most importantly, a throng of beautiful women. Oh, and Leopard. Xiao Ran rubbed the dog's head, and Leopard ingratiatingly lay on the ground, exposing his belly, the greatest show of trust and loyalty to Xiao Ran. After petting the dog for a while, Xiao Ran went to take a shower. Being out all day, it was inevitable to get a little dirty. There would be training later, so washing now would save him for washing later. After watching a show with the women, they began to eat dinner. And after dinner, that was the main event. Daily workouts for robust health. A night passed. After breakfast, Xiao Ran seemed like a husband going to work in a Japanese film, except the number of wives seeing him off was a bit excessive. Every time Xiao Ran left, Su Qingmei and the other women couldn't help but worry. But it wasn't that they were afraid he'd spend money outside or bring back new women. They were afraid something would happen to him. Their fates were deeply intertwined. If one died, all would perish. Xiao Ran started the car and set off to collect fuel according to the planned route. He still had 4 days, enough time to visit most of the gas stations and such, and, of course, only those in the urban area. If he were to include towns and villages, even 40 more days wouldn't be enough. However, collecting fuel for another 4 days should provide him with enough for a decade or two in his interdimensional space. Of course, it still wasn't enough, but there was no need to rush anymore. First gas station collected. Second gas station collected. Third gas station collected. No fuel. Xiao Ran frowned. He saw signs of forced entry in the fuel storage area. So, this gas station must have been looted after the apocalypse, not simply run out of fuel before the disaster. This meant there was a new group collecting oil. Was it the Chong family, or new personnel dispatched by the Hope Camp? If one still wanted heating now, fuel was necessary for electricity generation. Of course, firewood could also work, but where would one get it? Fuel was much more convenient. Xiao Ran continued to the next gas station, but to his surprise, this one was also empty. Damn it, who's competing with me for fuel? Xiao Ran continued forward, arriving at the 5th gas station. People. He immediately spotted a group of people busy in the fuel storage area. He noticed them, and they, of course, noticed his arrival. After all, who wouldn't notice an SUV roaring in? So, 3 people walked over. Xiao Ran opened the door and got out. His spatial gate was already open, and he warily watched the 3. Never underestimate anyone. Yo, brother, that's a nice car you got there. The man in the middle of the 3 said. He seemed to be the leader of the group, firstly because he wasn't participating in the work, and secondly, the other 2 clearly stayed a step behind him. Xiao Ran faintly smiled. So what if it's nice? Hey, no need to be so hot-tempered, the central man said, still smiling. My name is Dong Xiaoshan. What should I call you, brother? Dong Xiaoshan? Xiao Ran's heart stirred, a hint of surprise appearing on his face. This world is too small, isn't it? Who is Dong Xiaoshan? The tutoring center teacher who worked for the Yu family father and son and almost caused Su Xinran to lose her innocence. Oh no, beast would be more accurate, as some people only look human. Of course, there was another possibility. It was just a coincidence of names. Xiao Ran asked. I feel like I've heard that name somewhere. Were you a teacher before? That's right. I ran a tutoring class before the disaster, Dong Xiaoshan admitted without suspicion. So it really was him. A smile played on Xiao Ran's lips as he sized up Dong Xiaoshan. Should he take him back alive or dead? Dead, probably. Alive would be more troublesome. Xiao Ran certainly wouldn't go out of his way to kill Dong Xiaoshan and Yu Jiacheng for the Su sisters. But since he coincidentally ran into him, he naturally couldn't miss the opportunity. Dong Xiaoshan was also sizing up Xiao Ran, calculating in his mind. Should he seize by force, or bring him under his command? Xiao Ran saw the hesitation and ruthlessness in his eyes. Without speaking, he directly pulled out a pistol from his pocket and flashed it. Dong Xiaoshan immediately made a decision. Subdue him. It would be a huge loss if they lost several men just to snatch a car. Conversely, as long as Xiao Ran came with him then, he wouldn't have a choice. Having a gun wouldn't matter. Brother, you're really brave, daring to come out alone at a time like this. I can only say you have great skill and great guts, Dong Xiaoshan said, pretending not to have seen the gun Xiao Ran flashed and put away. Are you interested in joining us? Don't rush to refuse. We work for the Yu family. Do you know the Yu family? The Yu family from Qinghong Group. Old Master Yu is eager for talent, especially at a time like this. As long as you work for Old Master Yu, you'll definitely enjoy an unprecedented stroke of luck with women. He lowered his voice as if sharing a secret. Before the disaster, Old Master Yu established a song and dance troupe. Everyone in this troupe is a beauty among beauties. In the past, the Old Master kept them for his own pleasure or used them to entertain important clients. I'm telling you, the women in this song and dance troupe have enough beauty and figure to be TV stars. However, to reward us hard-working individuals, the Old Master now allows us to visit the song and dance troupe once a week. Brother, are you tempted? Damn, that Yu Jiacheng really knows how to have fun. He built a song and dance troupe for his amusement and still has this lackey scouting for female students? One old beast. Xiao Ran's mind raced. Go with him might be a good idea. First, he could take care of Yu Jiacheng. Second, they must have collected a lot of fuel, so he could wipe them all out in one go. He had come out to collect fuel anyway, so what difference did it make if it was a gas station or somewhere else? Tempted. Xiao Ran nodded, but his temptation was vastly different from what Dong Xiaoshan imagined. Dong Xiaoshan was overjoyed. My friend, you've made the right choice. You definitely won't regret it. I certainly won't, but you guys definitely will. Xiao Ran smiled, feigning impatience. Big brother, can you tell me more about that song and dance troupe? It's so cold now. How does the old master manage to support so many people? Know your enemy and know yourself, and you'll never be defeated. Dong Xiaoshan chuckled. Of course, ordinary families can't cope with this hellish weather. But within the Qinghong group, there's a secret entertainment venue. You understand, for those kinds of activities, you always need to keep things discreet. Inside the secret venue, there are sauna rooms, KTV rooms, and a whole range of entertainment facilities you can imagine, and some you can't. For secrecy, this hidden place isn't connected to the company's power grid. It uses its own generator. So, even though the power is out now, our group isn't affected at all. The reason we're out collecting fuel is to ensure the generator runs smoothly. Oh, Xiao Ran uttered. Indeed, I should have asked more. One question, and it's all clear. This means there's no need to rush into conflict. Dong Xiaoshan would naturally take him to the Qinghong group, to that secret venue. Good. Saves me the trouble of searching. Both sides had their own plans, so they got along quite well. After collecting the fuel, they went to the next gas station. How inefficient, Xiao Ran thought, watching them transport the oil barrel by barrel, sighing inwardly. When he collected oil, he directly sent the entire fuel tank into his spatial dimension, which was highly efficient and quick. Thus, by the time they had emptied this gas station, it was already getting late. So, they didn't continue collecting oil and instead hurried back to Qinghong Tower. The Qinghong group was located in Qinghong Tower. This skyscraper was 56 stories high, symbolically representing the 56 ethnic groups. Clearly, Yu Jiaqing had intended to curry favor with the authorities when he built this building, but his conscience was black. The car was parked in the underground garage, and they ascended the building. The generator only supplied power to the secret venue, not the entire building, nor could it. Xiao Ran followed Dong Xiaoshan and his group to the 18th floor. He could clearly feel that Dong Xiaoshan's attitude had become less enthusiastic ever since they entered Qinghong Tower. This wasn't surprising. Previously, Dong Xiaoshan had only been polite to him to lure him over. Now that the person was here, how could he run? Why bother being so courteous anymore? He's after my person, my car, or perhaps both. Xiao Ran didn't mind. He simply heightened his vigilance. His spatial perception was continuously active, now capable of uninterrupted use for half an hour. So, Xiao Ran didn't mind splurging a little. Upon reaching the 18th floor, Dong Xiaoshan took down a large picture frame from a wall. Behind it was an electronic panel, a keypad requiring a password. He deliberately blocked Xiao Ran's view with his body and entered 6 digits. 819247. Haha. Xiao Ran saw it all clearly through his spatial perception. Then a secret door on the wall silently opened. Inside, dim lights flickered, reminiscent of the cheap allure in a dark alley when one walks alone. Please, my friend, Dong Xiaoshan said with a smile, after hanging the picture frame back. Now, Xiao Ran could only join them and obediently hand over the car. He never liked taking risks, so bringing both the person and the car back was much simpler and less troublesome. Xiao Ran followed Dong Xiaoshan into the passage. Once inside, Dong Xiaoshan pressed something on the wall again, and the secret door closed, leaving no trace whatsoever from the outside. The group proceeded. After walking through a long passage, the area ahead suddenly opened up. It looked very much like a hotel reception, brightly lit and incredibly spacious. Wait here. I'll go get the old master, Dong Xiaoshan said. With that, he left, but the others did not. Instead, they stood in place, looking at Xiao Ran with pity. Their expressions, their gazes, were as if they were looking at an idiot. Xiao Ran's heart stirred. He clearly had a gun in his hand, yet Dong Xiaoshan still dared to go and invite Yu Jiaqing over. What did that mean? Yu Jiaqing had a way to counter guns. It couldn't be a bulletproof vest because that wouldn't protect his head. So, there was only one possibility, an ability. Yu Jiaqing was actually an ability user? Xiao Ran found it a bit incredible because the 3 ability users he had encountered, including himself, were all young, definitely not old men. Was something different now? Xiao Ran pretended to have noticed nothing and just waited silently. A moment later, the person arrived. Dong Xiaoshan led a man in his 50s, a half-old man, over. Seeing Dong Xiaoshan's extremely obsequious manner, it was exactly like a puppet soldier from the past. Xiao Ran, how dare you remain seated after meeting our old master Yu? Dong Xiaoshan immediately bellowed. Have you no manners? Now that he had met the main target, Xiao Ran naturally didn't need to act anymore. He slapped his handgun onto the table, displaying an air of arrogant confidence, as if to say, I have a gun, I'm the strongest in the world. This was, of course, to mislead Yu Jiaqing. He never tired of tricking people. Why go to great lengths and take risks when a sneak attack could solve things? Moreover, He was observing Yu Jiaqing. Logically, this old man should be in his 50s, and even with the best upkeep, a decline in physical function would be inevitable. However, seeing his vigorous strides, even Dong Xiaoshan had to jog to keep up. If the old man had an ability, was it body enhancement type? Like that mutated husky from before? Haha, this time it really is killing two birds with one stone. However, I absolutely cannot be careless, Xiao Ran reminded himself. Never underestimate any ability user. No, even an ordinary person can threaten him if they have a gun. So I must be careful at all times. Prudence keeps you green for ages, but a single reckless act can cut you down in an instant. Seeing the gun, Yu Jiaqing remained completely unperturbed. He said calmly, "Young man, put away your gun. That thing is useless against me. I can guarantee that before your finger even moves to pull the trigger, I'll have already broken your bones." From this statement, it could be deduced that there was a 90% probability the old man possessed an ability, and it was body enhancement related. Fortunately, I prepared a large quantity of kinetic steel rods, stones, and sniper bullets. Even if you're a body enhancement ability user, I'll still blow you to bits. Xiao Ran deliberately showed hesitation. You're the enemy of the Su sisters. I'll never let you off. Yu Jiaqing was startled at first, then showed immense delight. You know those two sluts? Where are they now? His only son had died because of the Su sisters, so he hated these two women to death. Since you killed my son, then give me 10, no, 20 children. He's taken the bait. Xiao Ran, with an air of noble righteousness, shook his head. How could I possibly tell you their whereabouts? Yu Jiaqing, you sent Su Qingmei to jail and even threatened Su Xinran. I will never forgive you. Having said that, he immediately raised his gun and aimed. Yu Jiaqing sneered. His body moved, and he charged towards Xiao Ran, fast as lightning. To ordinary people, he truly seemed like a flash of lightning. By the time their nerves reacted, he would have already arrived. But, not to mention Xiao Ran's body had already undergone 4 enhancements. His eyesight and nerve reactions far surpassed ordinary people. Even without such enhancements, didn't he still have spatial perception? The moment Yu Jiaqing moved, his movement trajectory appeared in Xiao Ran's mind. Clear, even in slow motion. Because, no matter how fast you are, can you compare to thought? Yu Jiaqing's speed at this moment was only around the speed of sound, a bit slower than that mutated husky, so it was naturally even more impossible for him to escape Xiao Ran's spatial perception. Suddenly, Yu Jiaqing's body appeared, stopping abruptly 3 meters in front of Xiao Ran. This scene was too bizarre. To an ordinary person, Yu Jiaqing seemed capable of teleportation, being here one moment and in a completely different place the next. However, the bizarreness didn't stop there. Xiao Ran knew that ability users had an instinctive premonition of danger, so he never fantasized about Yu Jiaqing directly rushing into the spatial gate, thereby easily and simply eliminating this opponent. On the contrary, everything he said and did was to make Yu Jiaqing charge over, and even more so for this momentary abrupt stop. From sudden acceleration to sudden stop, how long would it take to re-accelerate and regain full speed? Faster than my bullets? Whoosh, 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 dozens of bullets shot out silently. Yu Jiaqing was indeed an ability user. Even though the bullets were nearly at the speed of sound, impossible for ordinary people to perceive, he was different. He saw them. Not only did he see them, but he was also able to make defensive movements. He shielded his face and chest, these two vital points, with his hands, and quickly curled his body. This was to protect his lower abdomen and groin, and more importantly, to build power in his legs, allowing him to burst back into high speed in the next instant. Xiao Ran smiled faintly, everything unfolding as he had predicted. Then, dozens of steel rebar pieces and over a dozen stones were also launched. This was only the first wave. The second and third waves were all kinetic steel rebar. How big was the spatial gate now? 25 by 25 meters. Therefore, the area covered by these attacks was also enormous. Thud, 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 clink, 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 clink. When the bullets hit Yu Jiaqing's arm, only a few managed to penetrate, and not deeply, completely failing to injure the bone. The bullets fell to the ground with crisp clinks. But this was just a diversion. Before Yu Jiaqing could counterattack, the kinetic steel rebar had already arrived. Now, this was serious. The kinetic steel rebar's speed indeed couldn't compare to bullets, but how heavy was a single piece of rebar? Its destructive power was absolutely not something a single bullet could match. And it wasn't just one. They came in a continuous stream. He had plenty of these. He could prepare tens of thousands of them overnight. Thud! The kinetic steel rebar struck Yu Jiaqing's arm, and the impact was significant. An ordinary person's arm would likely have been completely shattered. But Yu Jiaqing was indeed an ability user. With this strike, his arm merely showed a strange indentation and bend, but it didn't break, let alone cause flesh and blood to fly everywhere. His defense was incredibly strong. Even Xiao Ran couldn't help but marvel, because if it were him, his arm would definitely have snapped with a single hit from that rebar. But this was only the beginning. Hood, 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 hood. The rebar kept coming, one after another. After a dozen or so hits, even if Yu Jiaqing was a physical ability user, both his arms were brutally smashed and broken. A bloody mess. But Yu Jiaqing had no time to cry out in pain, because more rebar continued to batter him. Now that both his forearms were broken and gone, how could he block? And what's more, large stones were whistling past his ears from all directions, accumulating and completely sealing off his escape routes. Now he finally understood that all of this was a trap set by Xiao Ran, luring the enemy into a trap. And once he was lured into the trap, he was as good as dead. He didn't want to die. Let's talk this out. I'll give you whatever you want, the old man cried out loudly. Although both his arms were now broken, leaving him utterly crippled, his legs were still intact. As long as he could catch his breath, he could still easily kick someone to death. You cripple my hands? I'll take your life. However, Xiao Ran not only didn't stop attacking, but he also couldn't even be bothered to respond to him. This was clearly an intent to kill him. Those were just two sluts. I have plenty of beautiful women here. I can give them all to you, Yu Jiaqing said unwillingly, continuing to struggle. Thud! But he could no longer defend himself. A piece of rebar brutally pierced through his chest, going straight through his body. Fortunately, it didn't hit his heart. Otherwise, even as an ability user, he would have instantly died. Struck by this, the breath he had been holding could no longer be sustained. Thud, thud, thud. The next few pieces of rebar continuously stabbed into his body. The more rebar that impaled him, the harder it became for him to move or dodge. Death was inevitable. The old man was unwilling to accept this. The apocalyptic natural disaster hadn't cast him from heaven into hell, because he had gained abilities and remained an overlord among people. Moreover, with no laws now, and no need to consider morality, he could endlessly unleash the darkness within his body, committing any evil act with impunity. Who would stop him? No one. Even if there was, with his immense power, he could kill them with a single punch or explode them with a kick. He disdained everything. But he had only just begun to enjoy days of doing as he pleased, and now he was facing death? He couldn't accept it. No, 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 he roared, his face contorted in a ferocious grimace, his eyes filled with madness. Thud! A piece of rebar pierced directly into his mouth, then burst out through the back of his skull. Yu Jiaqing's roar abruptly ceased, his eyes rapidly began to lose focus, and his pupils dilated. But, as a physical ability user, his life force was incredibly tenacious. He still had a faint breath left, his limbs twitched, and his broken arms swayed. If he still had hands, he would surely want to grasp something. He didn't want to die. He truly didn't want to die. He had too many regrets. Crucially, he didn't even know Xiao Ran's identity. It was too unfair, too unacceptable. Would Xiao Ran leave any future troubles? He didn't even gloat a single word before two more bullets shot out. Thud, thud. They accurately struck Yu Jiaqing's two eyes, burrowing deep into his brain. Yu Jiaqing's body shuddered violently, then finally stopped moving. Only then did Xiao Ran walk over. He reached out and pressed, and the obstacles blocking his path immediately vanished one by one. Then, he pressed on Yu Jiaqing's body again. A warm current surged. Done. From Yu Jiaqing's attack to Xiao Ran's counterattack, which resulted in Yu Jiaqing's death, the entire process lasted only a mere dozen seconds. Thus, Dong Xiaoshan and the others were completely bewildered. They still wore cruel smiles on their faces, waiting to see Xiao Ran subdued by Yu Jiaqing. His arms and legs easily snapped like biscuits. But in the blink of an eye, Yu Jiaqing had turned into a corpse. No, I must be hallucinating. If I just close my eyes and open them again, holy crap, it's still the same. Their faces all contorted into expressions of disbelief, because it truly was unbelievable. Xiao Ran should have only had a pistol in his hand, so where did all those steel bars and stones come from? What the hell? A super-powered individual. Dong Xiaoshan finally reacted, trembling as he stared at Xiao Ran. God, what kind of monster did he bring back? Thump. He immediately dropped to his knees. Lord Xiao is mighty. Lord Xiao is awe-inspiring. I am willing to follow Lord Xiao, to be Lord Xiao's dog from this day forward. If Lord Xiao tells me to go east, I wouldn't dare go west. His head was pressed firmly against the ground, his body drenched in cold sweat. Key figures: Su Qingmei, Su Xinran. He had also been involved in the matter concerning the Su sisters. Seeing this, the others couldn't help but kneel as well, their bodies trembling. In their eyes, Yu Jiaqing was practically a god of war. He could even bend and snap steel pipes with his bare hands. Yet, even such a formidable individual was taken down by Xiao Ran in just about 10 seconds. What fight could they possibly have left? What they didn't know was that Xiao Ran had made too many preparations beforehand. Bullets, kinetic steel bars, kinetic stones. Therefore, Yu Jiaqing was essentially caught completely off guard, unaware that Xiao Ran was also an ability user. Lured into taking the initiative, he was in a situation where he could only passively endure the onslaught, which led to his instant kill. Even the slightest difference in circumstances would have prevented Yu Jiaqing from dying so quickly. Xiao Ran smiled faintly, and bullets instantly poured out of thin air. He had already locked onto everyone's positions using spatial perception, so the spatial gates opened in 3 different directions, and bullets shot out at various angles. Screams filled the air. Everyone was shot in the forehead, their dying expressions not merely similar, but absolutely identical. This speed was even faster. In less than 3 seconds, everyone in the hall was dead. Only one remained, Dong Xiaoshan. While experiencing the changes brought about by absorbing the abilities, Xiao Ran said to Dong Xiaoshan, "Tell me about this place in detail." "Why, yes. Dong Xiaoshan quickly began his explanation. Fearing Xiao Ran's displeasure, he spoke with extreme thoroughness. Xiao Ran listened. The spatial gates had expanded again, reaching 30 by 30 meters, and their maximum deployment distance had finally increased to 5 meters. Well, at least there was some improvement. As for spatial perception, its maximum range had become 11 meters. But what excited him most was the increasingly strong sensation of a new ability budding. Xiao Ran suddenly took out an apple, and then simply looked at it. Seemingly nothing changed, but Xiao Ran smiled. No, it should be described as pure ecstasy. He cut the apple open, and a bizarre scene appeared. The apple's core had been, how to put it, seemingly scooped out long ago. It wasn't cut out by a knife. Even if a knife had touched it, it wouldn't change the fact that the entire core had been extracted. This was because Xiao Ran had used his new ability to directly inflict damage inside an object. Just like this apple, despite being outwardly undamaged, its core had been severed by Xiao Ran. Xiao Ran tried using this new ability on a table, but it wouldn't cut. Ugh, is the limit just objects as tender as apple flesh? What use is this ability, then? Useful, very useful, because even physical ability users, with their thick skin and tough flesh, are hard to penetrate with bullets. Sniper bullets can only cause superficial wounds without damaging bones or tendons. And this ability can't even cut wood. But what about a physical ability user's brain? Their blood vessels? Can they also be that tough? Absolutely not. Therefore, this is undoubtedly a great weapon for dealing with ability users. The key is that spatial gates are a passive skill. If he encounters an ability user, they would have a crisis warning, making it virtually impossible for them to fall victim. To this day, no ability user has died by crashing headfirst into an alternate dimension. While various bullets and kinetic steel bars can indeed be fired from the alternate dimension and are very effective right now, serving as Xiao Ran's ultimate weapon, what happens when ability users grow stronger? Especially physical types whose strength will increase, speed will quicken, and defense will strengthen. Will he still be able to hit them in the future? And if he hits them, will he be able to pierce their defenses? These are all questions. Therefore, Xiao Ran urgently needed an offensive method, and one that had room for growth. Now, he had finally found it. This new ability shall be called spatial severing. It can be deployed up to 5 meters away. As for its power, it's only at the level of cutting apple flesh, making it virtually impossible to cut muscle or bone. But to cut blood vessels or brains, very easy. Moreover, the human brain is the most vulnerable. Damage to any part of it is extremely dangerous, potentially leading to loss of consciousness, paralysis, or even immediate death. Excellent. I finally have an active offensive skill. This can perfectly combine with spatial perception, because I can detect my opponents in advance without even needing to turn around. Even if an enemy is hiding behind a wall, I can easily kill them. Of course, spatial severing also has its imperfections. First, its range is only 5 meters. If he encounters a powerful physical ability user, he could very likely be instantly killed by them rushing from a distance. Second, its power is still a bit low. What if, as ability users grow stronger, even their brains and blood vessels can be enhanced and become tougher? Therefore, I need to continue upgrading my ability to make spatial severing even more powerful, ensuring it can slice an ability user's brain to pieces, killing them on the spot. He wondered how an ability user's crisis warning would fare against spatial severing. Xiao Ran suddenly became very curious. This ability activates with virtually no preparation time, no more than 0.1 seconds. So, even if an opponent became aware of it, how would they defend themselves? Unfortunately, there were no ability users available for him to test it on right now. Furthermore, there was the physical enhancement, which would take 2 to 3 days to fully manifest and wouldn't be very noticeable for now. Moreover, the more abilities he absorbed, the smaller the percentage of physical enhancement would be. After he absorbed 100 abilities, each new absorption would only provide a 1% increase, which would be too minuscule. He withdrew his thoughts, and by this time, Dong Xiaoshan had finished speaking, looking at him with nervous eyes, his body trembling as if he had malaria. Don't be afraid. Death isn't that big a deal. I'll make it quick, and you'll barely feel a thing, Xiao Ran said with a smile. Dong Xiaoshan's face was filled with despair. Don't talk like you've died before, you damn psycho. Xiao Ran had already extracted the information he needed. So, without hesitation, he smashed Dong Xiaoshan's leg with a rock. Ah! A piercing shriek echoed endlessly through the hall. Dong Xiaoshan still managed to glance at Xiao Ran. Didn't you say it would only hurt for a moment? Oh, I changed my mind. Xiao Ran nodded. People like you deserve to die a torturous death, my words. In truth, he also wanted to slowly torture Yu Jiachong, that old bastard, to death. But the man was an ability user, and as long as an ability user was alive, they posed a threat. They had to be eliminated immediately. This was called safety first. Venturing out was for strength, but it didn't conflict with self-preservation. Dong Xiaoshan's legs were shattered, and he was losing a lot of blood. Without timely treatment, he would bleed to death. So, there was no need to bother with him. He could just perish on his own. Naturally, he couldn't just leave like that. He continued further inside. This secret facility was vast, and he had only seen the Grand Hall so far. Who knew how many more secrets lay hidden within? As he went, rooms lined both sides of the corridor. They were like hotel rooms, but much larger. If he had to compare them, they were like presidential suites or executive suites. In any case, they were huge. Xiao Ran only meticulously inspected one of them. In the bathroom, he found a strange chair, or was it a bed? What in the world was this thing? He paused for a moment, then images from news reports flashed in his mind. Scenes of police officers cracking down on prostitution. Oh, he instantly understood. So, Yu Jiachong would invite business partners here to play, and after they'd selected their beauties, they'd indulge themselves right here. TSK. Xiao Ran's mind stirred, and he collected this specialized bed for adult entertainment into his dimensional space. Right? He remembered what it was called. He might not have eaten pork, but he'd certainly seen the pig run, hadn't he? However, these reception rooms were all empty, not a single soul. Xiao Ran didn't even need to look closely. As long as he opened a door and used his spatial sense, he could instantly tell if anyone was inside and where they were. After traversing the long corridor, 2 rooms stood at the very end. Xiao Ran entered one of them first. It was a large office connected to a lounge. Finally, there was someone here. A middle-aged man, looking refined and scholarly, was wearing headphones and listening to music, appearing quite at ease. He hadn't heard Xiao Ran enter. He only saw him with his eyes, which made him pull off his headphones, his expression turning angry. How dare you barge into the old master's office? Such a lack of manners. Because he was listening to music with headphones, he hadn't heard anything from outside. Another possibility was that the doors here were well soundproofed. Xiao Ran glanced around. The edges of the doors were wrapped in leather, providing powerful sound insulation. Xiao Ran activated his spatial cutting ability. The middle-aged man instantly screamed, clutching his right eye, but blood seeped through his fingers. One eye was already blinded. Xiao Ran said indifferently, "Answer my questions or die." The middle-aged man was both in pain and horrified. Since he had always followed Yu Jiachong, he was quite accepting of ability users. Thus, he immediately realized that the young man before him must also be an ability user. Yes, please ask. Xiao Ran asked, "What's your name?" "He Yu Hang." The middle-aged man replied concisely, without any superfluous words. "Secretary?" Xiao Ran asked with a smile. Yes. He Yu Hang nodded. Indeed, a secretary had to be skilled at reading people and discerning their moods to win their master's favor. This man must have been quite adept at it. Otherwise, with the apocalypse already here, why would Yu Jiachong still keep him around? You must know about all the evil deeds Yu Jiachong has committed, right? Xiao Ran asked. Yu Hang quickly replied, I know everything. Without waiting for Xiao Ran to ask further, he rattled off information like pouring beans. Xiao Ran listened, shaking his head unconsciously. No wonder Yu Jiachong could grow his power and business so strong, and no wonder he set up such a secret facility. It was because he had installed hidden surveillance in every private room, recording images of the people entertaining and abusing women. This could then be used for threats and blackmail. That's why Yu Jiachong's business kept growing larger and larger. Yu Hang even pulled out a box of hard drives, filled with high-value videos secretly filmed and curated over the years. Xiao Ran had no interest in watching adult films. With a thought, Yu Hang's eyes lost focus, and he simply collapsed on the spot, lying motionless on the ground. His brain nerves had been cut into a pulp by Xiao Ran. However, Xiao Ran also grimaced slightly. Using this ability consumed a lot of his power. No, it consumed an extreme amount. He estimated that with his current total power, he could only use it 10 times consecutively, at most. Only 10 times. So 1. I need to continue increasing my total power, which means absorbing more of it. 2. When fighting enemies, I need to resolve the opponent within 10 moves, otherwise I'll have to revert to my old combat habits and deal with opponents using bullets, kinetic rebar, and so on from my dimensional space. Xiao Ran exited the room. It was Yu Jiachong's office and lounge, and there was nothing else of interest to see. The last room. He pushed the door open. It was heavy, but effortlessly so for Xiao Ran. As the door swung open, Xiao Ran felt as if he had entered the wrong room. Inside were 12 women, all dressed in yoga attire and exercising. Xiao Ran believed there were 2 types of clothing that best showcased a woman's figure. One was the P8.I, and the other was yoga attire. However, whether it was a P8.I or yoga attire, you had to have a good figure to pull it off. Otherwise, even a slightly less than perfect figure would have its flaws magnified indefinitely. And these 12 women before him, not a single flaw could be found. The sound of him opening the door startled the women inside. They immediately lined up in a row and knelt down in unison. Welcome, master. Damn, who could resist this? Before the apocalypse, the beauties here were Yu Jiachong's way of entertaining distinguished guests. These included both business partners he needed to collaborate with and influential figures he painstakingly tried to please. Therefore, the women here were essentially high-class courtesans. Their clients were all highly influential people in Sucheng, even across Jiangnan province and the entire country. Yu Hang said that none of these beauties were over 25 years old, and their monthly salaries reached as high as 100,000. Besides that, Yu Jiachong often bought them luxury goods, took them on yacht trips, and flew them around on private jets, trapping them in a materialistic spiral they couldn't escape. Accustomed to high consumption, they obediently became his kept women, serving various big shots for Yu Jiachong and even probing for secrets. However, after the apocalypse, although Yu Jiachong still kept them, their clients changed. They were no longer powerful figures, but only Yu Jiachong himself. Dong Xiaoshan's claim that they could also join the song and dance troupe for fun was pure deception. Given Yu Jiachong's current power, did he really need to win people over? It was entirely a matter of submit and live, defy and die. Xiao Ran's gaze swept over the 12 women. Though all were beautiful, there were clear distinctions. The 2 in the center were the most stunning, with the best figures, tall even among tall women. Even with Xiao Ran's current demanding eye, he had to admit they met the standard of top-tier beauty. 90 points, even 91. They were likely by Rue, the captain of the pleasure troupe, and Yan Qin, the vice-captain. Xiao Ran showed a smile. He wouldn't be shy. It was utterly captivating and enthralling. Yet, even so, Xiao Ran decisively pulled himself away. Of course, he left behind a pile of supplies, including water and food. Why didn't he bring them back to the villa? Firstly, the villa was too small. Cramming 12 people in at once would make it terribly cramped. Secondly, these women had served who knows how many men. So, having some fun was enough. Bringing them home, to keep them, not to mention them. Even Han Yun and Wang Lulu had been subjected to Xiao Ran's disdain because they weren't virgins. How long had they been locked in the basement before being promoted? These women were high-class courtesans. Bring courtesans home to keep? Forget it. However, their techniques could be popularized and taught to Su Qingmei and the others. Anything beneficial to him should naturally be widely adopted. These women had been practicing yoga indoors and had no idea what was happening outside, so he didn't need to silence them. Returning to the main hall, Dong Xiaoshan lay dead from excessive blood loss. He collected the body into his spatial dimension, then also took Yu Jiaqing's corpse. After that, he went downstairs and left. It was getting late, so he didn't bother collecting more fuel and headed home. There are quite a few ability users out there. Perhaps other ability users have already discovered they can absorb powers to grow stronger. So, even though I'm constantly getting stronger, I must never become complacent. I need to keep getting stronger. Damn it, they're forcing my hand. I just want to relax, with beautiful women in my arms, every day. Back home, Su Qingmei and the others breathed a sigh of relief. Their man was back. Their anchor had returned. In such extreme weather and a cruel apocalypse, they truly needed a backbone. With Xiao Ran present, they felt confident. Otherwise, they'd constantly worry about whether they'd have food and water tomorrow, and whether they'd have to risk their lives to find supplies today. And now, they lived in a warm villa, bored enough to exercise, binge-watch shows, and even cooking and housework became ways to pass the time. How leisurely were their lives? All thanks to Xiao Ran. So, when Xiao Ran returned home, he was welcomed like the moon surrounded by stars, receiving the warmest reception. Xiao Ran chuckled, took out a USB drive, and tossed it to Han Yun. This is some study material I specially prepared. Watch it carefully, practice hard, there'll be a test. Han Yun took it, and all 9 women were extremely curious. Study material? What were they supposed to learn? They plugged the USB drive into the TV box, turned on the TV, and opened a video. Instantly, all their faces flushed. Heavens, you can do that! The 9 women were dumbfounded. Even though none of them were innocent maidens anymore, they still gaped, utterly unable to believe it. Xiao Ran laughed. From now on, I'll establish a ranking system. Students who study well can achieve high ranks and enjoy corresponding benefits. As for those with poor performance, if you fail 3 consecutive assessments, I'll have to ask you to leave. He wasn't keeping princesses or young ladies, or wait, maybe he was just not the ancient kind, but the KTV kind. There's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. You get what you put in. History tells us that egalitarian distribution doesn't work. The more you work, the more you get. The less you work, the less you get. If you don't work, you get nothing. If you just respond passively, I'll only ensure you're fed, but don't expect good food. It's that simple. Xiao Ran needed to motivate everyone. Introducing a ranking system would naturally foster competition and break the habit of eating from the big pot, allowing him to enjoy himself to the fullest. He was just too bored. Otherwise, he'd be busy with work and his children schooling every day, exhausted like a dog at night. And even if his wife rivaled Diao Chan, he probably wouldn't feel much inclination. The 9 women's expressions varied. Some were hesitant, some reluctant, but some were also enthusiastic. For example, the green tea girl and Wang Lulu, their eyes lit up, clearly showing their competitive spirit. Xiao Ran called over the Su Qingmei sisters. He first spread out a very large plastic sheet on the ground. The moment Su Qingmei saw it, she blurted out, "On this? There's a bed, but you want to be on the ground? Are you a pervert?" Xiao Ran rolled his eyes at her. "You're the pervert." Su Qingmei shot a look back at him, but clearly didn't dare retort. But the next moment, she knew she had misjudged Xiao Ran, because on the plastic sheet, there were suddenly 2 corpses. Su Ran immediately covered her eyes with both hands. She was completely a hothouse flower. This type of personality, maybe overbearing CEOs would like it, but Xiao Ran definitely didn't. In an apocalypse like this, he appreciated resilient personalities like Su Qingmei's more. Even Zhou Yun's son, that green tea, was much better than a delicate flower like Su Ran. As expected, Su Qingmei didn't even blink. She suddenly looked shocked. Yu Jiaqing, Dong Xiaoshan. Xiao Ran looked at Su Qingmei with some surprise. It wasn't strange that she recognized Dong Xiaoshan, but Yu Jiaqing's mouth and eyes were gouged out, and you still recognized him? Hiss, truly hated to the bone. It seems that saying you'd recognize them, even if they were burnt to ashes, was an exaggeration, but it had a basis. What? Su Ran lowered her hands, enduring the nausea as she looked at the 2 corpses. But she only recognized Dong Xiaoshan. She would truly never forget that villain, because he almost ruined her entire life, while her sister's life was truly and completely ruined. Xiao Ran. Su Qingmei turned to look at Xiao Ran, and suddenly bowed. Thank you. After finding her sister, her only wish was to see Yu Jiaqing and Dong Xiaoshan brought to justice. But she also knew that given the harsh environment, this was destined to be nothing more than a pipe dream. The only possibility was that the 2 of them had frozen to death in the severe cold. But she never expected that Xiao Ran would actually bring back their bodies. It was obvious that they had both been killed by Xiao Ran. Ran hadn't expected it either. Her lips moved, and she also said, "Thank you." Her gaze towards Xiao Ran was filled with surprise, gratitude, and an indescribable emotion. They had all committed themselves to Xiao Ran out of necessity, but what woman doesn't have some fantasies? Now that Xiao Ran had brought back the two women's enemies, what did that mean for them? Xiao Ran had taken their plight to heart, going out of his way to kill these two villains. This was how thoughtful and heartwarming a gesture. How could one not be moved? Women are emotional creatures, and coupled with the fact that Xiao Ran was their first and only man, there was already a special bond. Now, this wave of goodwill instantly broke through the women's defenses. Xiao Ran wasn't treating them as tools, but cherishing them. For a moment, both women's hearts swelled, incredibly agitated. This was the effect Xiao Ran wanted. In truth, he had only coincidentally encountered Dong Xiaoshan. He hadn't gone out specifically to find these two. But why would he explain? What's not to like about gaining goodwill for free? Hurry, hurry, repay me with your greatest gratitude. Xiao Ran never considered himself a good person. Why would he bring back Yu Jiaqing and Dong Xiaoshan's bodies? Wasn't it precisely to make the Su sisters grateful and devoted to him, to serve him wholeheartedly? It worked. That night, everyone showcased their learning achievements, but their progress varied. Xiao Ran was very satisfied. This was exactly the spirit he wanted. Very good. Continue studying tomorrow, and strive to improve your skills. He smiled. I'm giving you half a month. After half a month, I'll grade you. Don't think I'm joking. Just to say, those ranked in the 4th tier will have their rooms assigned to the basement. At these words, all 9 women were moved. Xiao Ran really wasn't joking. Work hard, everyone. Xiao Ran smiled. After experiencing the baptism of the song and dance troupe today, he felt he shouldn't let the women in his home just eat and wait to die. Now, it seemed the effect was good. Wait for the harvest. Even if they didn't completely reach the song and dance troupe's level, they should at least reach 80%. One night passed. The apocalypse entered its 36th day. In the early morning, Xiao Ran brushed his teeth, washed his face, and casually glanced out the window, immediately startled. It was snowing. Holy crap, it's actually snowing? Xiao Ran looked out the window in disbelief. The snow wasn't heavy, but because the weather was cold enough, it didn't melt when it fell, and the ground had already turned into a vast expanse of white. He no longer had his foresight, so he was bewildered by the snow. This extreme weather actually had another change. Xiao Ran frowned. After breakfast, he still collected fuel according to his original plan, preparing for their move into Chong family manor after seizing it. Today went smoothly. They didn't encounter other fuel collection teams. However, 2 of the 11 gas stations on his plan were empty. Someone had collected the fuel beforehand. Xiao Ran was somewhat surprised. It seemed there were still quite a few survivors. And what did collecting fuel mean? Either it was for cars, or they had generators at home. As long as they don't provoke me, we'll be fine, otherwise. Finishing a busy day, he returned home, took a shower, and after dinner, he began to check Su Qingmei and the others' learning progress for the day. The progress was immense, especially Su Ran. A genius is a genius. As long as she applied herself, how could she not learn? However, Xiao Ran wasn't indulgent tonight. Instead, he took everyone to the rooftop again to replenish a batch of kinetic rebar. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough time and energy to sharpen one end of the rebar. Otherwise, its lethality could have been increased by another notch. They were busy until 3 in the morning before returning home to rest, quickly falling asleep. In the early morning, as soon as Xiao Ran opened his eyes, he looked out the window. Snowflakes fluttered. It was still snowing. Looking at the ground, the snow was already a foot deep. While yesterday's snowfall wasn't heavy, it kept coming down and didn't melt, accumulating little by little until it piled up naturally. Was this snowmelt toxic? Xiao Ran couldn't help but wonder. The hailstones had indeed been toxic, but it had been over a month. Had the cosmic rays that experts talked about really moved completely away from Earth? So, this snowmelt might be non-toxic. If so, that would bring about massive changes. Previously, the toxic hailstones had contaminated all natural water sources. Even without the low temperatures, all the trees and plants outside would have died, and humans and animals would have had to find purified water to drink, or else they'd be poisoned to death. Thus, besides hunger, humanity's great challenge was dying of thirst. If the snowmelt was non-toxic and drinkable, then one of the major problems plaguing human survival would naturally be solved. Of course, with the weather this cold, how to melt the accumulated snow was also a problem. Eating it directly? You're already freezing to death. Do you want to die faster? Xiao Ran collected some snow into his spatial ability. He certainly wouldn't test it himself, but he could use others to try. For example, if someone tried to rob him, he'd make them eat the snow raw to see if they got poisoned. Today's snow was heavier than yesterday's. Xiao Ran frowned, thinking if it kept snowing like this, there would be problems. Never mind, I'd better go collect fuel first. He drove off. With a foot of snow on the ground today, he could clearly feel significant resistance when driving. Fortunately, this fuel consumption was still minor. Over 20 minutes later, Xiao Ran arrived at his first gas station for the day. Time to work. The second, the third, the fourth. Time quickly passed until noon. Xiao Ran ate lunch in his car, rested a bit, and then got back to work. His current busyness was for future ease, so he couldn't slack off. He arrived at the second-to-last gas station on his plan for the day. He saw a heavy truck. It was from a Chong family. The style was identical. He could tell at a glance. The Chong family was out collecting fuel again. Was this surprising? Anyone with a bit of foresight would seize the early opportunity to collect fuel. Wait a few more months? Every gas station would be empty by then. By that time, they might have to go out to sea to find specialized oil tankers or LNG carriers. If they managed to acquire a ship, it should last them for several years. Xiao Ran decisively stopped his car and turned off the engine. The Chong family? Can't let them off. He opened the car door and stepped out. The chill immediately swept over him, making him shiver while also sharpening his mind. This was a good state to be in. At this moment, the Chong family members also spotted him, and they all put down their work to surround him. His car can actually drive in this kind of weather. It's modified, just look at the tires. Good stuff. It's ours now. There were 6 of them in total, all holding tools like hammers and wrenches, clearly for prying open fuel tanks. However, another person got out of the truck, and he had a gun. Because of the gun, they were completely reckless. Oh, what's this? A show. A light chuckle came, drawing everyone's attention, making them turn their heads to look. Only Xiao Ran was an exception, because he had spatial perception. The 7 Chong family members all showed expressions as if they'd seen a ghost. What did they see? A person, riding a bicycle, leisurely approaching. The key thing was, he was even wearing a short-sleeved shirt. Could you believe it? An ability user. Suddenly, the 7 Chong family members exclaimed in unison. Because the Chong family's second son, Chong Yingxiong, was an ability user. Even if they hadn't personally seen Chong Yingxiong use his ability, they would have heard others talk about it. So, upon seeing this incredible scene, their first reaction was that this person was definitely an ability user. Xiao Ran, meanwhile, was observing this person with his spatial perception. The person on the bicycle was a youth, at most 18, possibly even just 16 or 17. However, his eyes gave Xiao Ran a bestial feeling, ferocious, brutal, devoid of any humanity. Others only saw that this youth could travel in the extreme cold, but Xiao Ran saw more. The bicycle's wheels weren't sinking into the snow. One should know that the snow hadn't been compacted. Never mind a person's weight, even a brick placed on it would sink. So wasn't this strange? Xiao Ran immediately found the reason. The youth had ridden all the way here, leaving behind a long trail of ice. Clearly, the youth's ability was freezing, directly turning the accumulated snow into solid ice, which prevented the bicycle and his weight from sinking into it. But using your ability just to show off like that? Xiao Ran shook his head inwardly, but his killing intent was already burning. Oh, you know about ability users? The youth stopped, still sitting on his bike with one foot on the ground. He smiled and said, so you must have seen or know other ability users. Can you tell me where he is? He pointed randomly at someone. You tell me. That person hesitated for a moment before speaking. Too slow, I'm angry. The youth raised a hand, and an ice shard formed out of thin air, shooting towards the person. Thwack! It instantly pierced the person's throat. The person's mouth was open, but only blood bubbles gurgled out as he unwillingly collapsed and died. Was his answer slow? No, it wasn't. He only hesitated for a second at most. Clearly, this youth was bloodthirsty. He just loved killing. Xiao Ran frowned. This kind of antisocial and extremely dangerous personality was, ironically, very well suited for this apocalypse. He didn't care if the world drowned in floods. He just did as he pleased. With this person dead, the 6 remaining Chong family members were all greatly alarmed, showing anger, but more so, fear. Xiao Ran, very appropriately, shivered slightly as well. The only man holding a gun immediately aimed at the youth. I warn you, don't mess around. The youth grinned widely. Go on, shoot. Shoot right here. He pointed to his forehead, his smile utterly psychotic, sending shivers down one's spine. The gunman's hands were trembling as he stammered. What do you want? So, you're an idiot then? Never mind, you can die too. The youth's smile instantly vanished, his expression becoming chillingly cold and terrifying. The gunman, in extreme panic, pulled the trigger on the youth. Bang, 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 bang. Amidst a flurry of gunshots, an ice wall had already appeared in front of the youth, blocking all the bullets. Hit-ah! The youth laughed again, but it was like a demon's cackle. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. He shot out 3 ice shards, piercing the gunman's 2 wrists and lower abdomen. Amidst the flying blood, the gunman could no longer hold his gun. He fell to his knees, pressing both hands tightly against his abdomen, his face contorted in agony. The youth could have easily killed him, but chose to wound him instead of killing him outright, clearly intending for him to die a slow, painful death. How vicious! How twisted! The youth burst into laughter, incredibly excited by the pain of others. Who will answer me? He demanded loudly. As he spoke, he pointed at another person. That person quickly replied, Our second young master is also an esper. What's his power? The youth asked. I don't know. I really don't know. The person quickly explained. You don't even know that? What good are you? The youth snorted coldly, and another ice spike shot out. Puffed. The person's throat immediately gushed blood, and he collapsed to the ground, dead. This youth had a strange temperament, prone to killing at a whim, yet sometimes he enjoyed tormenting people. He was truly bizarre. Tell me, what's this second young master's name? The youth pointed at the 4th person. That person trembled, unable to speak. Answering wouldn't even help, because failing to answer just one question meant death. Too slow. Die, the youth said casually, an ice spike flying towards him. Puffed. The 4th person also died. The youth hummed a tune. Listening closely, it was actually a children's song. Daddy's daddy is grandpa. He finally dismounted his bicycle and approached Xiao Ran and the others. Strangely, while Xiao Ran and the others' feet sank into the snow, his didn't. This made him seem tall, though in reality he was only around 167 to 168 cm. Mama's mama is grandma. The youth hummed, his gaze fixed on Xiao Ran's face. You answer my last question. Chong Xiong, Xiao Ran replied. The youth was still about 7 meters away, a bit too far for Xiao Ran's liking. The youth had apparently lumped Xiao Ran in with the Chong family group, which wasn't surprising. But the 3 from the Chong family naturally knew him. Hearing Xiao Ran speak Chong Xiong's name, they were all stunned. How do you know? A bit weird. Fortunately, the youth was questioning Xiao Ran, not them, which brought them some relief. The youth continued forward, a half-smile on his face, just like his personality, capable of turning vicious and striking deadly at any moment. What's his power? The youth reverted to his previous question. Fire, Xiao Ran replied. The youth made no sound, then muttered to himself, He's fire, I'm ice. That means we're natural rivals, He took 2 steps forward and asked again, Where is old Chong currently? At. Xiao Ran only managed 1 word. With a thought, Space Rend activated. This was the first time this new ability had been used against an esper. Ugh, the youth sharply turned his head, then saw one of his eyes shatter as if struck by a knife, blood immediately gushing out. But the youth seemed to feel no pain. On the contrary, he revealed a twisted grin. You're an esper. So you're an esper too. He seemed incredibly excited, as if completely unconcerned about losing an eye. Xiao Ran sighed. Damn esper, crisis aversion. He had disguised himself well, blending in with the 7 ordinary people, and the youth hadn't detected anything amiss, even entering his optimal attack range. However, Space Rend had still allowed the opponent to evade. Of course, he hadn't completely evaded. The youth's left eye was still blinded. But what Xiao Ran needed was an instant kill. This youth, though, was simply too deranged. Even with a blinded eye, he was still laughing, to say there was nothing wrong with his mind. Only a ghost would believe that. The other 3, meanwhile, were petrified with fear. Another esper, and this one seemed even more powerful, injuring the youth right off the bat. So they were the true wretches. They had actually tried to steal Xiao Ran's car earlier? If not for the youth's appearance, would they already be corpses? Facing 2 great devils, what would be their fate? The critical thing was, they didn't dare move. But even fully armored, exposed to such extreme cold, their lungs would suffer irreversible damage within 15 minutes at most, leading inevitably to death. Originally, they would work for a bit then hide in the truck. Between a rock and a hard place, it seemed like death no matter what. Xiao Ran didn't even spare a glance for the 3. With his space perception active, he could kill them anytime. What's your name, and where are you from? He asked the youth. Without waiting for a refusal, he chuckled. I answered several of your questions just now. Shouldn't you answer mine? The youth actually tilted his head in thought for a moment, then broke into a wide smile. but with blood still streaming down his face, it was quite terrifying. I'm number 9 from Hope Camp. Xiao Ran stiffened. Hope Camp. Just then, the youth violently waved both hands. Swish, swish, swish. Over a dozen ice spikes shot out. They were incredibly fast and emanated an intense chill. However, when the ice spikes reached half a meter in front of Xiao Ran, they all mysteriously vanished. The youth froze. His goal in answering Xiao Ran was to lull the other party into a false sense of security, to get a chance for a direct hit. He hadn't expected such a fierce attack to be neutralized, and so effortlessly that it was beyond his comprehension. What type of esper power do you have? He asked curiously, his face truly filled with a thirst for knowledge. Guess, Xiao Ran chuckled, his mind churning. Hope Camp, that underground research center. He had known there were espers there, and not just one, but he hadn't expected to encounter one so soon. Possessing the same ice power, this youth was a cut above Song Hui. Could it be? A thought sparked in Xiao Ran's mind. This guy had absorbed esper powers. Yes, that was the only explanation. But, number 9? What kind of name was that? He railed internally. Wait, a research center? Was this youth a test subject? Otherwise, why would he use a name like number 9? Number 9? Was he the 9th among all test subjects, or the 9th among successful test subjects? If it was the latter, then that research center had at least 8 more espers. That was a bit astonishing, but also thrilled Xiao Ran. If he could sweep up all the espers in this research center, how many times would his strength skyrocket? Just looking at the youth, it was clear that the espers from this research center, or Hope Camp, were likely all deranged. So, he didn't need to worry about accidentally killing any good people. No, in today's society, whether you're good or bad, as long as I feel your threat, please just die. Youth number 9 tilted his head, looking at Xiao Ran, and said, Your attacks leave no trace, and my attacks vanish inexplicably. Can you control space? His single eye lit up, his face full of anticipation. Am I right? Am I right? He asked, looking as if he craved a reward. Damn it. No wonder they say there's a fine line between genius and madness. This lunatic guessed it in one go. But even if you've guessed I have spatial power, can you guess that a pile of bullets, steel bars, and rocks are about to smash into you? I guess right. I guess right. I'm so smart. Boy number 9 laughed with a morbid grin, staring at Xiao Ran. There was even a hint of surprise and resentment in his eyes, as if asking, Why haven't you praised me yet? What kind of expression was that? Xiao Ran frowned. What exactly was this underground research center studying, and what had they done to people? This boy's mind was definitely not right. A research center sounds fine, but add underground to it? It immediately reeks of illegality and anti-human experimentation. So this boy must have been driven mad by experiments. Madmen were the absolute worst. They feared neither death nor pain, and their behavior was unpredictable. Xiao Ran cursed furiously in his heart, but a smile appeared on his face. Yes, you're very smart. What reward do you want? I want your life. Boy number 9 shrieked, and his body moved. He ran a few steps on the snow, then surprisingly started sliding. Looking closely, an incredibly smooth ice path had appeared beneath his feet on the accumulated snow. So, he just needed a few running starts to gain momentum and glide. Swoosh, 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 ice cones shot over. And from different directions, too. The boy circled Xiao Ran, so the ice cones were being shot from all directions. How would Xiao Ran respond? With a thought, a pile of rocks materialized behind him, forming a solid wall. In front of him, a spatial gate opened. No matter how many ice cones were shot, he would absorb them all. This fighting style was simply magical. The 3 people from the Chong family watching from the side felt their eyes almost pop out. This was a battle of deities, a battle of gods. But it was tough on them, mere mortals, because if the gods just slightly misdirected their attacks, they would be the ones to suffer. Xiao Ran naturally wouldn't just take a beating without retaliating. He finally deployed the kinetic rebar from his alternate dimension, launching them at boy number 9. Why not use bullets? Because the boy wasn't a close combat type. Even sliding on ice, his speed was only about 10 meters per second, whereas kinetic rebar could travel at over 20 meters per second. Xiao Ran had previously fought Song Hui, who also had ice abilities and could block bullets with ice walls. Boy number 9 had just done the same, so bullets likely didn't have enough kinetic energy to break through the ice walls. He needed the more powerful kinetic rebar. Once the boy's ice walls were destroyed, a single bullet would be enough to easily finish off this opponent. Buzz, at least 100 rebars appeared simultaneously, shooting toward the boy. The boy's pupils constricted. Suddenly, hundreds of rebars whistled through the air. Wasn't that a spectacular sight? and he couldn't dodge them. Not that quickly. But a madman was a madman. The boy was actually smiling. He raised his hands, and a thick ice wall appeared before him. Thud, 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 the rebar struck, sending countless ice shards scattering. About 100 of them hit almost simultaneously, instantly shattering the ice wall. The boy retreated, rebuilding a second ice wall as he moved. However, under the barrage of kinetic rebars, this defense also immediately crumbled. Xiao Ran didn't need to expend his ability to use kinetic rebars. As long as he had stock, he could fire them with a mere thought. This was equivalent to Xiao Ran having an armory in front of him, and all he had to do was keep pressing a button. The boy kept retreating. After 19 consecutive ice walls were broken, he finally showed signs of tension. His ability was being depleted too much, too quickly. He was almost unable to sustain it. He only had himself to blame. All the way here, he had to show off, riding a bicycle and freezing the accumulated snow into ice to make it easy to pass. But this was also a continuous drain on his ability. Even if the consumption over 1 or 2 minutes seemed negligible, the accumulated amount couldn't be ignored, could it? And if he hadn't been fighting Xiao Ran in such an intense battle, another opponent wouldn't have pushed him this far. But Xiao Ran's attacks were so brutally relentless, breaking through 19 of his ice walls, putting him on the brink of defeat. Thwack! A rebar pierced clean through the boy's body. Arg! He screamed, but the initial shrillness gradually turned into a surprising sense of enjoyment. Again, you bastard! What the heck? Xiao Ran shook his head. This underground research center was definitely engaged in illegal human experimentation. Otherwise, how could a boy be driven to such a degree of madness? Though he thought this, his attacks didn't pause for a second. Deceased ability users were his preferred type. He liked them lying still, not moving. Swoosh, 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 this time was bullets. After breaking through his defense, bullets would inflict optimal damage. However, when the bullets hit the boy, they all bounced back. Son of a bitch, you're too careful. Boy number 9 cursed through gritted teeth. He actually had a sliver of power left, and even taking that rebar hit was intentional. It looked terrible being impaled, but he had avoided vital organs. It was just a common puncture wound. For an ordinary person, it would be fatal in such an environment. But for him, it was merely a minor injury. He deliberately took that hit, wanting Xiao Ran to think he had won, to relax his guard, come over to check the situation, maybe even gloat a bit. Then he could seize the opportunity to launch a counterattack, kill Xiao Ran with a single ice cone, and turn the tables completely. However, Xiao Ran had no such mentality. Why gloat over a dead man? It was better if he was completely dead. Faced with a dozen incoming bullets, would the boy dare to take them head-on? They were all aimed at his head. So, he was forced to use his ability again, forming a layer of ice on his body surface to block this wave of bullets. Quite impressive. Xiao Ran clicked his tongue. It wasn't strange for a thick ice wall to block bullets, but how thick could the ice layer formed on the boy's body be? Yet it still blocked bullets? This ice was even tougher than bulletproof vest material. Swoosh, 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 another dozen rebars shot out. If bullets couldn't break through, then he would continue with the rebars. A look of madness flashed in the boy's eyes, and he suddenly sprinted. He wasn't running away. He was charging at Xiao Ran. This was clearly a final desperate gambit. A slender boy, with a rebar sticking out of his body, running in short sleeves through the snow. The scene looked like something out of a movie. Truly a madman. A normal person facing such a desperate situation would either flee or beg for mercy. But the boy wasn't like that. He actually charged at Xiao Ran, intending to make a desperate, suicidal attack, which truly fit his madness. But this was the type of fighting style Xiao Ran feared the least. The boy sprinted wildly, now with no other thought than to get close to Xiao Ran and launch a final attack. He didn't care if it meant mutual destruction. Come on, even if you shoot me into a pincushion, I'll still rush to your side, grab hold of you, and unleash my final ability, freezing you into an ice statue. What a beautiful way to die that would be. Ha ha. Youngster number 9 charged towards Xiao Ran, looking like a madman. However, when he reached 3 meters in front of Xiao Ran, he strangely vanished. He'd entered a different dimension. Xiao Ran's mouth was slightly agape. Was he already defeated? That was surprisingly easy. Don't ability users have crisis premonition? Why did he still charge in? Oh right, this youngster had been battered so badly, and his ability was almost depleted. Otherwise, he wouldn't have resorted to such a desperate, life-or-death tactic. So, in this state, he couldn't pay attention to his crisis premonition, or perhaps it was gone entirely. If it was the latter, he'd gained another method for dealing with ability users, a war of attrition. Once the opponent's ability is depleted, he can easily absorb them with a space gate. Speaking of attrition, who in this world could compare to Xiao Ran? Theoretically, if he could gather enough bullets, artillery shells, and the like, he alone could contend against all other ability users in the world. Of course, this was only theoretical. Ability users would grow stronger and stronger, but the power of bullets and firearms wouldn't. Therefore, these weapons' effectiveness against ability users would diminish until they had no effect whatsoever. For instance, in his 2 encounters with ice ability users, it only took about 10 waves of attacks to kill Song Hui. But against youngster number 9, dozens of waves. And in the end, the youngster had to actively enter the space gate to be defeated. Xiao Ran's heart stirred, and he tossed the youngster's corpse out. He reached out and pressed, and immediately a warm current flowed through him. Comfortable. The maximum size of his space gate instantly increased to 50 by 50 meters, though it could still only open up to 5 meters away. The latter improvement seemed exceptionally difficult. His spatial perception expanded to 15 meters, and spatial cut instantly increased to 8 meters in range. It's important to note that previously, for every ability he absorbed, the space gate expanded by 5 meters. Now it suddenly grew by 20 meters. What did this indicate? Youngster number 9 must have absorbed 3 abilities, and including his own. That meant he effectively provided 4 abilities for the space gate to suddenly expand by 20 meters. This was the easiest to calculate. Of course, spatial perception and spatial cut also saw significant improvements, but Xiao Ran hadn't yet figured out the exact ratio of their growth. He only knew they had surged, but couldn't reverse engineer the calculation. As expected, this youngster had killed other ability users and very likely absorbed 3 abilities. What about the others? Number 1, number 2, number 3? Wait. Xiao Ran felt a renewed sense of urgency. If number 9 had already absorbed 3 abilities, were numbers 8 and 7 even stronger? And number 1? This research center. I need to go there as soon as possible. The stronger ability users became, the less effective bullets and similar weapons would be against them. Therefore, it was best to eliminate them quickly. Xiao Ran turned around and looked at the 3 members of the Chong family. The 3 of them had already been trembling. Under Xiao Ran's gaze, their legs collectively gave out, and they knelt. Xiao Ran smiled faintly. Why are you kneeling? The Qing dynasty ended ages ago, and besides, I'm no devil. No, you're far more terrifying than a devil. The 3 Chong family members wouldn't dare argue with Xiao Ran. After exchanging glances, they all stood up. Their eyebrows were already covered in ice crystals, making it look as if they'd grown white eyebrows. Get back in the car first. It's so cold outside, Xiao Ran said, appearing quite considerate. The 3 Chong family members were also practically frozen. Hearing this, they quickly nodded. So they all got into the truck. The truck hadn't been turned off, so it was very warm inside, though it became quite cramped with 4 people. Xiao Ran took out 3 cups of water and offered them to the trio. Drink. The water in the cups was melted snow. While Xiao Ran was still in the car earlier, he had placed snow in the cups, and because it was warm in the vehicle, the snow naturally melted into water. Did the 3 Chong family members dare to drink it? Who knew what was in it? But if they didn't drink, would Xiao Ran let them off? The 3 of them could only pull long faces, take the water, and start drinking. As they slowly sipped, they could only pray that Xiao Ran truly wasn't a devil. No matter how slowly they drank, a cup of water was quickly finished. Xiao Ran clicked his tongue. Because the previous hailstones were highly poisonous and had a strong odor when melted, tricking someone into accidentally drinking poison water would only work if their sense of smell and taste were completely gone. But this snow water, at least, had no smell. He could confirm that with a quick sniff. Since these 3 had drunk it, it meant there was no obvious strange taste either. Furthermore, previously, just a touch of the poisonous hailstones on the skin would cause extreme pain, and drinking a single sip would practically cost half your life. Yet, these 3 showed no unusual reactions from the first sip, nor any after finishing. Could it be that the snow that fell later was non-poisonous? If so, humanity finally had a glimmer of hope. Water, the source of life. Xiao Ran didn't rush to conclusions, but waited. However, absorbing youngster number 9's ability, which appeared to be 1, but was actually 4 in terms of quantity, had a massive impact on Xiao Ran. He could distinctly feel his cells rapidly dividing and strengthening within him. His stamina was surging. The growth was so rapid that he even felt an itching and soreness in his muscles, making him eager to immediately get into a fight. Additionally, there was a surge of desire, leaving him dry-mouthed and his impulses hard to suppress. He endured for half an hour, seeing that the 3 Chong family members remained unaffected. Even looking better now that they were warm, showing no signs of poisoning, he decided not to wait any longer. At worst, he could conduct further tests later. Besides, he had plenty of fresh water prepared and wasn't forced to use snow water. Therefore, whether the snow water was poisonous or not didn't truly affect him. With a thought from Xiao Ran, the 3 Chong family members instantly died on the spot. Spatial cut turned their brains into mush. Easy. Xiao Ran found that his previous cutting power was only at the level of slicing through an apple, but now it had nearly doubled. Thus, this time, using it to turn brains into mush was much easier. I can probably use it 17 or 18 times now, he estimated, very satisfied. Although he had only killed the 1 youngster this time, the harvest was astonishingly great. So, killing powerful ability users is dangerous, but the rewards are also great. This aligned with the characteristic of high risk, high reward. Xiao Ran got out of the car, then put away the heavy truck. He wanted the Chong family to lose all means of transportation, forcing them to be trapped within the manor so he could catch them all in one swoop. Otherwise, if any of them escaped, someone would always be thinking of him, and he'd never feel entirely at ease. However, his current desire was blazing, feeling as if he was about to be consumed by it. This time, the surge was truly intense. Xiao Ran got in his own car and immediately headed for Qinghong Tower. No other reason than its proximity. After parking, he swiftly ascended to the 18th floor. Familiar with the routine, he entered the password, and the hidden door immediately opened. He went inside, closed the hidden door, and proceeded directly to the waiting area for Yanqin and the others. Xiao Ran finally calmed down. Absorbing the abilities of a powerful individual can certainly grant instant ascension, but the side effects are truly immense. I almost ended up like a wuxia protagonist who accidentally ingested a potent aphrodisiac. Without a woman to help neutralize its effects, I'd have literally exploded. He truly felt like he was about to burst just now. His heart rate had exceeded 200 BPM, and if he measured his blood pressure, it would likely have been over 200 or even higher. It was only because he was an ability user. An ordinary person with such a heart rate or blood pressure would either die or suffer a stroke. "Just who are you?" Rui asked. The leader of this song and dance troupe possessed both the highest beauty and the best figure. Moreover, she was no mere flower vase. She was skilled in both singing and dancing, with a professional level of training, not just a casual dabbler. Xiao Ran smiled faintly. "What do you think?" "I'm guessing you're like the old man, a super ability user," Rui said. "After you left yesterday, we went out to look around and found a pile of bodies. Only the old man was missing. We just figured you killed everyone. Even the old man couldn't defeat you. You're too formidable." They weren't fools. When no one came to call them for dinner, they naturally sensed something was amiss. A quick look outside confirmed everything. Xiao Ran felt a little strange. "Aren't you scared?" Because when he arrived today, the 12 women had acted as if they were waiting for him to favor them. Yanqin interjected. "Of course we're scared, but no matter who controls this place, it won't affect us. Men, after all, aren't they just after a little bit of pleasure? And that's precisely what we can provide." There was a certain logic to her words. When a dynasty falls, ministers are sure to perish in droves. But would the brothel industry be affected? Yanqin and the others were quite self-aware, with an accurate understanding of their own position. Thus, they harbored no unrealistic expectations, and at the same time, remained optimistic because as long as a man was in charge, they could continue to live lives free from worry about food and clothing. "Isn't it just about that one thing?" Xiao Ran chuckled, thinking to himself, "You're taking too much for granted." These 12 women were indeed great beauties, especially Rui and Yanqin, who were top tier. But how many men had they served? Playing around was fine, but taking them home? He had absolutely no such intentions at the moment. He didn't argue with these women. There was simply no point. In terms of comfort, this place was much larger than his villa, but he hadn't considered moving here. The design was simply impractical. The construction focused on secrecy, with heating and insulation completely disregarded. Therefore, maintaining warmth here would consume an astounding amount of fuel. Fuel was the only resource Xiao Ran didn't have in particularly abundant reserves, so he couldn't afford such luxury. Besides, although this place was large, it wasn't significantly bigger than the villa, and the room layout was highly irrational. Essentially just a beauty pageant area and hookup rooms, not suitable for living. There was another, more fatal flaw. It was on the 18th floor. If there was just one explosion below, even if the entire 18th floor was cast from metal, falling from such a height would guarantee everyone would be smashed to pieces. Xiao Ran wouldn't bank on others not discovering this place. Destiny had to be held in his own hands. Xiao Ran still decisively left. However, he left behind some supplies. Fair trade. This was a principle Xiao Ran adhered to, almost obsessively so. It was the apocalypse, after all. Everyone developed a few quirks. Xiao Ran returned home. It wasn't even midday yet, and the snow accumulation had already reached 2 feet deep. Even with the powerful G-Wagon, driving was incredibly strenuous. Fortunately, the way home wasn't too far, and he finally managed to make it back to his residential compound. Xiao Ran frowned. If the snow continued to fall like this, future travel would become a hassle. And the villa was only 3 stories tall. What if this heavy snow kept falling and completely buried the entire villa? Was that even possible? In the past, Xiao Ran would certainly have thought it impossible. But now the extreme weather was so abnormal that Xiao Ran felt it wasn't impossible for the snow to fall to a 3-story height. He entered the villa, first taking a hot bath to shake off the cold. By the time he emerged in his bathrobe, it was already 6 in the evening. In a normal summer, the sky would still be bright at this hour, but everything was different after the apocalypse. The sun hadn't shown itself in a long time. Thick clouds blanketed the entire sky, so it was already quite dim at this point. However, visibly, the snow had grown heavier. Xiao Ran stood at the window, looking out. Although the fog was dense and visibility was less than a meter, he could see a large amount of snowflakes drifting onto the window pane, quickly turning the glass into a white blur. Clearly, tomorrow's snow depth would reach a new record. The women were also watching, their expressions equally solemn. It was truly one wave after another. If this heavy snow kept falling, would it bury the entire house? Just imagining the scene was frightening. Time to sleep. Xiao Ran simply decided not to think about it. Heaven wants to rain, a mother wants to marry. Was this something he could change just by worrying? A night passed, and dawn broke. When Xiao Ran woke up, the first thing he did was open the window. Whoosh! A cold wind swept in, but it didn't affect him in the slightest. Because this bastard had opened a spatial gate right against the window, sucking all the incoming cold wind inside. Naturally, he remained completely unaffected. The good news was that the snow hadn't yet covered the window. It was still more than a story below him. The bad news was, he was on the 3rd floor. In a single night, the heavy snow had accumulated to a height of an entire story. Wasn't this deadly? The key was that the snowflakes were like goose down, falling ceaselessly. At this rate, it would only be a matter of time before the heavy snow submerged the 2nd and 3rd floors. Holy crap, this was a huge problem now. Xiao Ran's brows were tightly furrowed. With the snow accumulation reaching such a level, not only would it submerge the house, but he would also be trapped. Driving out? How was that possible? Moreover, before the snow became solid, skiing or using a hovercraft to get out wasn't very realistic either. After breakfast, Xiao Ran and the women were all fully geared up. What for? Shoveling snow. Clearing a path now meant that even if the heavy snow eventually buried the villa, he could still escape through the cleared route. Xiao Ran opened the door, and immediately, a large mass of snow surged inwards, but it was all sucked into his alternate dimension. Time to get to work. That day, Xiao Ran's family spent the entire day shoveling snow. Even the leopard came to help, digging with its paws, sending snow flying. Thankfully, they only needed to clear the snow from the area in front of the door, creating a ramp to go out. Even if the snow was still falling and would continue to bury this path, the accumulated snow here would be much less than elsewhere, allowing Xiao Ran to go out as soon as the snow stopped. This villa, it seemed, they had no choice but to give up on. Now, even the 1st floor had become a basement, and with the heavy snow continuing, the 2nd floor was probably also in danger. They needed to go to the Chong family's manor. That manor was built on a mountain, so it had at least some elevation. Therefore, as long as the snowfall wasn't too excessive, even if the manor was covered by heavy snow, he could directly melt the snow with fire, and the meltwater would flow down the mountain instead of getting stuck, turning the entire manor into a huge block of ice. Did Xiao Ran dare to melt the ice with fire now? Not to mention the meltwater having nowhere to go. If he melted the poisonous hailstones at the very bottom, tisk tisk, that would be a huge mess. Everything will have to wait until the snow stops, Xiao Ran murmured. The heavy snow had sealed off the city. It was as if heaven didn't want people to go out. So, Xiao Ran honestly stayed home, not going anywhere. He believed that in such an environment, absolutely no one could venture out. Purely suicidal. After shoveling the snow, Xiao Ran's family all went to bathe, warming themselves up. Unfortunately, though there were 2 bathtubs, they could only accommodate 2 people at most, so if everyone wanted to soak, they had to queue up. Xiao Ran really wished he had a swimming pool, so he could watch the women's graceful figures in the water. The Chong family's manor. It should have a swimming pool, right? With the amount of energy he had collected now, supplying a large manor to operate at full power for 1 or 2 years would absolutely not be a problem. So, energy has become the biggest problem now. Is there an oil refinery in Sioux City? If he just went to an oil plant to move oil, wouldn't the efficiency skyrocket? He checked the map and couldn't help but sigh. There were only steel mills, no oil refineries. However, this heavy snow isn't without its benefits. With everything buried, ordinary people naturally won't have the ability to retrieve oil, so my competitors have suddenly decreased significantly. The next time I find someone retrieving oil, they must be an ability user. Kill them. The family began dinner, followed by entertainment. Early in the morning, Xiao Ran pushed open the window to look again. Wow, the accumulated snow had climbed even higher. Now, the second floor was completely invisible. So, let's continue shoveling snow today. After shoveling snow, it was afternoon again. With nothing else to do, they could only play games. Xiao Ran felt so decadent. People shouldn't indulge in pleasure like this and be unmotivated. Definitely tomorrow. By evening, the snow suddenly stopped. However, the accumulated snow had reached 2.5 stories high. So if it weren't for the thick fog, the entire city would appear as a vast expanse of white. The snow finally stopped. It was so cold that the snow would solidify overnight, making it possible to go out tomorrow. Where to? East Mountain. The villa was almost submerged by the snow, and although it wasn't a direct threat to him yet, was Xiao Ran the kind of person who only thought about retreat when danger was imminent? Absolutely not. He would depart tomorrow and first scout out the Chong family's manor. That night, Xiao Ran didn't engage in any activities. Instead, he slept soundly. Even though his physique was strong now and a bit of activity wouldn't have much impact, he still chose to be cautious. He checked his spatial dimension. There were millions of bullets, hundreds of thousands of kinetic steel bars and kinetic stones, plus several rockets. And he had nearly 100 ice cones launched by Teenager No. 9. These could be used to deceive other ability users. You think I'm ice attributed? Sorry, but you might die because of a misjudgment. Xiao Ran was already quite adept at playing dirty tricks and deceiving people. The true path was to survive and ensure safety for ages. As for being honorable and upright, had they watched too many wuxia films? A night passed, and outside the window, everything was shrouded in white. Ready to depart. The snow at the villa's entrance had already been cleared, revealing a ramp wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. It wasn't very wide, but for Xiao Ran, who possessed a dimensional space, it was naturally ample. Theoretically, as long as he could get out, he could take anything with him. He could even collect the entire villa, provided he dug up its foundations. The wind died down, the snow stopped, but the world was a vast expanse of white. Even without the sun, the accumulated snow reflected a blinding white light. Staring at it for too long would surely ruin one's eyes. So, Xiao Ran put on his goggles. He gazed around. Many buildings were buried beneath the white snow. Skyscrapers remained unaffected, but all the roadside shops had vanished. The community walls, the main gate, all gone. A single glance revealed an endlessly vast landscape, with roads appearing more than twice as wide. If not for the towering buildings still standing, Xiao Ran would truly have thought he had arrived in a vast snowfield. He recalled the line, an old man in a straw cloak and hat, fishing alone in the cold river snow. Overwhelming solitude. Standing in this snowfield, Xiao Ran's first sensation was profound loneliness. It felt as if he were the only human left in the entire world. He shook his body and tossed out a hovercraft. It was a shame the hovercraft hadn't been modified. Otherwise, Xiao Ran would at least have requested increased toughness for its base, to prevent it from wearing out after prolonged friction on the snow. Still, a hovercraft shouldn't be so fragile, right? Xiao Ran remembered a Jackie Chan movie where hovercrafts were driven on roads, even used in street chases. While snow might not be as smooth as water, it should be much better than concrete or asphalt. After all, freshly fallen snow, even when frozen, shouldn't be as sharp as a blade. It was fine. He had 9 more hovercrafts anyway. Xiao Ran got onto the hovercraft and began operating it. Soon, the hovercraft started moving, wobbling uncertainly. Normally, even if hovercrafts were allowed on the road, Xiao Ran's driving skills would surely lead to constant collisions. But now was different. The roads were incredibly wide, providing Xiao Ran ample time to correct his course. Furthermore, after so many augmentations, Xiao Ran's neural response was naturally far superior to an ordinary person's, and his limb flexibility and coordination had reached an extremely high level. Thus, after a few kilometers, the hovercraft's wobbling decreased significantly. Eventually, it drove in a straight line. Unlike cars, hovercrafts provided excellent cushioning even if they crashed. So, Xiao Ran boldly and confidently increased his speed to 30 miles per hour. Don't think that's still slower than most electric bikes. What other mode of transport can travel out here right now? Is there? Besides, isn't 30 miles per hour 50% faster than 20 miles per hour? Isn't that enough? From the villa to Dongshan, the straight line distance was approximately 60 kilometers, while the actual driving distance was over 80 kilometers. However, with the lake frozen and lower-lying buildings completely submerged by snow, Xiao Ran was essentially traveling in a straight line. What he needed to worry about was getting lost. Navigation had long since become unusable, so finding his way relied solely on visual recognition. For example, looking for landmarks or street signs. But how tall were street signs? With snow depths exceeding 7 meters, what street signs could possibly poke their heads out? Therefore, determining his location relied entirely on landmarks. Hidden beneath thick clouds, the sun was completely invisible. Xiao Ran drove with extreme caution. At this point, a slight deviation could lead to a monumental error. He might accidentally end up in Xishan. Fortunately, he was a native of Suzhou and quite familiar with the landmarks along the way. Most importantly, some sections of the elevated highways were 30 to 40 meters high, impossible to be submerged by heavy snow, thus serving as markers for his location. This is Yoxin Elevated Road. Wuzhong Eon. Reached Lake Tai. Xiao Ran looked ahead, seeing a circle of residential buildings forming an arc, but beyond them was nothing but snow, completely empty. Because that was originally the location of Lake Tai, still a little less than half the distance to go. Xiao Ran continued forward. Dongshan was like a leg of Suzhou kicked into Lake Tai, with the lake on both its left and right sides. This characteristic was very obvious. As Xiao Ran drove onto Lake Tai, keeping an eye on the land to his right would ensure he didn't deviate from his course. This should be about it. Xiao Ran pulled out his phone, stepped out of the hovercraft, and aimed it at the sky, searching for a satellite signal. Signal acquired. He sent a text message. It didn't matter who he sent it to, because the satellite message sent by the Mate 60 included latitude and longitude. He sent it, and could see the coordinates himself. So, by comparing them with the coordinates of the Chong family manor on a map, he could tell how much he had deviated from his destination. The deviation was approximately 3 kilometers. Xiao Ran patted his phone, a smile forming on his face. Miles ahead, he continued forward. He drove the hovercraft onto the island, slowing down to begin his search. The Chong family manor was so large, he shouldn't miss it. But that wasn't guaranteed, as the snow was so thick now. Apart from the main buildings, the rest of the manor was probably covered in snow, so he still needed to be careful not to accidentally miss it. Of course, Xiao Ran had already prepared to stay out for 2 to 3 days. He had left enough food and water at the villa for 10 days. The generator's fuel was also topped up. He had no worries. Found it. Xiao Ran stopped the hovercraft and looked ahead. A massive sign was embedded into the mountainside. Although it had a layer of accumulated snow, it wasn't completely obscured. Most importantly, after the snow stopped, the heavy fog had also fully dispersed. Visibility was only limited by the available light. Qingfeng Garden. This was the largest and most luxurious commercial residential area in the Dongshan region. All residences were villas, each with at least a 200 square meter garden. The entire community had approximately 80 households, and the Chong family's villa was the prime villa. Xiao Ran even suspected that this community was developed by the Chong family's Baolong group. Otherwise, the Chong family's villa would be ridiculously large, covering at least 6 acres, over 6,600 square meters, and enclosed by its own independent walls. This should be called a manor. How could a mere villa be so massive? Of course, Xiao Ran had seen all this on a satellite map. Now, the walls were completely buried by snow. How could he see them? Only the parts of the community above the 3rd story were visible. Even so, the buildings here still stood 2 stories high. Therefore, these must be 4-story or taller buildings. Right, Dongshan was a mountain. Digging basements was too difficult, so it was better to build more stories above ground. Xiao Ran stopped the hovercraft far away, then put on his skis, jumped off the hovercraft, and with a press of his hand, the hovercraft vanished. About 500 meters remained, not far. He started skiing. He progressed awkwardly. Even though he was a skiing novice, with his enhanced physical attributes, everything was manageable. His movements were indeed clumsy, but he steadily moved forward. Soon, the tall buildings of the Chong family were in sight. Xiao Ran wasn't about to barge in. They had guns. While a spatial gate could devour anything, it would close on its own the moment he moved. Reopening it was instantaneous, but what if a bullet happened to fly at him at that exact moment? Though the odds were slim, why take the risk? Xiao Ran would definitely act, but it would have to be at night. Even if the dense fog didn't return, it would be dark at night, and he wouldn't be seen sneaking in, right? The dead of night was a natural cloak. Xiao Ran would definitely act, but it would have to be at night. Even if the dense fog didn't return, it would be dark at night, and he wouldn't be seen sneaking in, right? The dead of night was a natural cloak. Besides, he could also observe for a bit. Xiao Ran set up a tent on the mountainside. White, it was practically invisible in the snow. Inside the tent, a stove was burning, an electric blanket lay beneath him, and 3 heaters ran on battery power. It was indeed power-intensive, but what did it matter? Even with the temperature outside plummeting to over -40 degrees, Xiao Ran was sweating profusely and had to reluctantly turn off 2 of the heaters. He pulled out his binoculars and began observing. Figures moved about in the Chong family manor. But beyond that, he couldn't see anything else. Even if the Chong family still had trucks, could they drive out now? And coming out on foot? That was a joke. Only Xiao Ran, with more money than he knew what to do with before, would have bought something like a hovercraft, and more than one at that. But were others also reborn individuals? Mass reincarnation? So, the Chong family members must all be trapped and highly anxious. The Chong family supported a lot of people, and their daily food consumption was surely a huge number. Unable to go out and scavenge for supplies, just eating through their reserves, how could they not be anxious? But since they couldn't go out, Xiao Ran wouldn't gather any more intelligence just by observing. He shifted his binoculars slightly. This was a residential complex. He was startled, because there wasn't just one household with living people. He could occasionally see figures at the windows. How did you survive? Xiao Ran found it incredible. He already knew about the Chong family situation, but what about the other households? Did every single family have massive food reserves? That wasn't scientific. Xiao Ran clicked his tongue in wonder, but he wasn't interested in investigating further for now. His current target was the Chong family. How did you survive? The vast white snow reflected light, stinging his eyes. Xiao Ran watched for a while, and even though his physique had been enhanced, his eyes included, he still couldn't quite bear it. He put down the binoculars and retreated fully into the tent. It's so boring alone, he mused. Should have brought a girl along. 2 people could find some way to have fun. The thought popped up, and Xiao Ran immediately shook his head. He hadn't even exercised last night for today's operation, and now he was thinking about that. Time to rest and conserve energy. There's an operation tonight. Xiao Ran closed his eyes to meditate. It's so boring alone, he mused. Should have brought a girl along. 2 people could find some way to have fun. Time to rest and conserve energy. There's an operation tonight. Time passed slowly. He couldn't truly fall asleep, so after resting for a while, he pulled out his phone and started binge-watching shows. No need to worry about power. He had plenty of power banks. Finally, darkness began to fall. Accompanying the night was a thick fog, instantly making it impossible to see one's hand in front of their face. The heavy fog still hadn't truly dissipated. Xiao Ran shook his head. The clouds were exceptionally thick now, making it naturally pitch black at night. If it were just darkness, a powerful flashlight would still allow one to go out. But with such dense fog on top of that, even having the sun on your head wouldn't help. You still wouldn't see anything. However, for Xiao Ran, this was natural cover. What was the key? Even though his eyes couldn't see clearly, his spatial perception remained unaffected. Everything within a 15-meter radius was now within his grasp. Thus, in the midst of the mist, he was like a god. It was time to move. Xiao Ran had already eaten, but not to his fill. Eating too much made one sluggish. Being only half full was enough to maximize concentration. Although the mist enveloped the land, Xiao Ran had long since determined his direction. He moved towards it, and after sliding for several hundred meters, his spatial perception finally saw the main body of the Chong family's manor. However, he had arrived at a corner of it. Xiao Ran couldn't help but inwardly call himself lucky. Moving through such a secretive mist, even with his direction locked, he still veered off course. It was only a few hundred meters, and he almost went completely astray, showing how difficult it was to maintain a straight line in such an environment. If the deviation had been a bit greater, even his spatial perception wouldn't have been able to pinpoint his location. Fortunately, his error wasn't significant. Xiao Ran moved toward the window. Trying to use the main gate now? Heh, was he going to dig a hole like a groundhog? Even in the dead of night, Xiao Ran still took out his professional glass-cutting tool, a diamond-tip cutter. With a few scratches, then a push, the glass fell out, but instead of hitting the ground, it was absorbed by his spatial gate. Perfect. He reached in, gave a gentle flick, and the window opened. Xiao Ran climbed in, then closed the window, making no sound. He took off his skis and put on a motorcycle helmet. This wasn't to conceal his face, but for bulletproofing. It had some use after all. At a time like this, Xiao Ran was perfectly willing to stack armor on himself. Even though most people should be asleep by now, his sneak attack shouldn't be discovered. The room was warm. Xiao Ran even took out a thermometer and measured it. 6 degrees Celsius. This was far from comparable to a villa, but don't forget how large this building was. For even a secluded corner room to be 6 degrees, that was already quite impressive. Xiao Ran couldn't help but ponder. If a family like the Changs could survive, what about national power? It should also be able to, right? It's just that the current weather was too harsh. National power still couldn't extend itself. He couldn't help but shiver, reminding himself to keep a low profile, because with his current strength, he absolutely couldn't contend with a nation. If a missile came, how could Xiao Ran block it? Yes, he could indeed absorb the missile into his alternate dimension, but could he stand on the rooftop at all times, waiting for missiles to strike? Low-key, low-key. Survive 10,000 years in peace. Low-key, low-key. Survive 10,000 years in peace. I'm no ambitious schemer. I just want to guard my own little patch of land. So, how could I ever stand against a nation? Xiao Ran reigned in his musings. His spatial perception remained active. After absorbing Boy No. 9's ability, this power was enough to sustain him for an hour of continuous use. This room was astonishingly large. It wasn't living quarters, but a gym, complete with all sorts of fitness equipment. He opened the door and stepped out. The entire corridor was pitch black. Normally, the corridor would have been lit up like a hotel, but with the apocalypse, even the wealthy Chong family had to be frugal. Wherever they could save, they had to save. Energy was limited and incredibly precious. Xiao Ran went to the first floor first. From the bottom up, he planned to clear out all living occupants. To Xiao Ran's surprise, none of the rooms were locked. They opened with a simple twist of a knob. Whatever the reason, it made things easier for him. Otherwise, smashing doors open would surely create a ruckus. Empty, empty, empty. Someone. The lights in the room weren't on. It was pitch black, but it didn't affect Xiao Ran at all. Under his spatial perception, no detail could be missed. Xiao Ran saw that the room had clearly been modified, all furniture removed and replaced by beds. 9 beds in total. Each bed had a person sleeping on it, all men. Such low treatment clearly indicated they were thugs employed by the Chong family. Why were they all sleeping in one room? Because there was clearly heating supplied, with the temperature around 15 degrees Celsius. So, this was to save energy using central heating. With a thought, Xiao Ran fired 9 bullets simultaneously. The 9 men died in their sleep, unaware of what was happening. Xiao Ran stepped forward, pressed here and there, and the 9 bodies vanished. He planned to occupy this place, so it was naturally impossible to leave bodies in each room. He'd deal with them all uniformly after everything was done. That's why he didn't violently smash the windows. Replacing a pane of glass would definitely be much easier than replacing an entire window. Xiao Ran exited the room and continued checking. Empty, 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 someone. Here, too. There was no furniture, replaced by beds. 8 people in total, all men. Xiao Ran showed no mercy, sending out 8 bullets. The 8 men died cluelessly. Well, at least they suffered no pain. He continued. Xiao Ran found a third occupied room, again with 8 people. Kill. Without alarming anyone, Xiao Ran had already killed 25 people. He searched the entire first floor. There were no more living people. Good. Time to go to the second floor. All the rooms on the second floor were also unlocked, and most were empty. However, unlike the first floor, the occupied rooms only had 1 person each. All men. Xiao Ran guessed that the first floor housed the Chong family's lowest-ranking personnel, hence the worst treatment, requiring 8 to 9 people to cram into one room. The second floor, on the other hand, was for Chong Baolong's old comrades who had followed him for years. Their treatment was better, with each person having a private room. Private rooms meant consuming more electricity, which in turn meant more fuel. That guy before, what was his name? Zhu something? Never mind, it's not important. He said the Chong family had 50 security personnel, and they should all be living on the first floor. Why did I only kill 25? Oh, the Chong family sent them out to collect oil, and I killed 2 groups of them. There might be other teams who died outside or trapped out there, so only 25 are left here. Additionally, there are about 15 of Chong Baolong's old comrades, who should be on the second floor. Indeed, the men living on the second floor were all quite old, generally over 60. Xiao Ran counted. He had killed 14 in total. Are there only 14, or is the number higher, and some aren't on the second floor? Did they temporarily leave? That's impossible. Either only 14 people lived on the second floor, or if there were more, they must have been called upstairs by the Chong family. He continued. He returned to the third floor, which was where he entered initially, as snow had already buried the first and second floors. This floor was primarily dedicated to fitness. Besides exercise equipment, there was also a ping-pong room, a badminton court, and a bowling alley. But now, every room was closed and dark. When Xiao Ran reached the last room, he found a standard swimming pool. An indoor pool. How luxurious. He checked. The pool was actually designed to be temperature-controlled, but it was clearly turned off now. The energy consumption would have been terrifying. And how precious was water now? Xiao Ran noticed that the pool's water level was nearly a meter lower than normal. What did that mean? The Chong family was using it as drinking water. How truly serendipitous. Xiao Ran couldn't help but sigh in amazement. Wealthy families had abundant reserves. Even when facing natural disasters, they were far luckier than ordinary households, because they unexpectedly had preparations in place. Normally, common families would only store food, not water, right? Even if they stored water, it wouldn't be in large quantities. But the Chong family had a pool, and an indoor one at that, eliminating the possibility of contamination. It instantly solved their drinking water problem. Xiao Ran nodded. Fortunately, he had collected a large amount of energy in the past few days, supplying a swimming pool. Not difficult. Who told him he wanted to see the women frolicking in the water in their swimsuits? Men just had that one little hobby, didn't they? To the fourth floor. The first room Xiao Ran entered was a home theater, very large. Although it couldn't compare to a cinema, it could comfortably seat around 15 people. The chairs were top-tier leather sofas, and the sound system was also top-notch, as Xiao Ran had heard of the brand. If even an outsider had heard of the brand, wouldn't you call it top-tier? Not bad, not bad. These conditions were much better than his own villa. Xiao Ran's standards for renovating his villa were safety, requiring warmth and sturdiness. The warmth and sturdiness here were unknown, but from a comfort perspective, this place was probably several levels above. He retreated and continued checking. When he entered the second room, he thought he had suddenly transmigrated to that secret place in Qinghong building. It was too similar. The layout and decor all exuded an air of decadence. Except for one thing. There were no beauties standing in a row here. Of course, with the Chong family living here, how could they not have a bunch of beauties to serve themselves? Oh my, never mind, I can do without this. He searched further and found that the fourth floor was entirely occupied by women. Their common characteristics were young, beautiful, and good figures. They were clearly the Chong family's kept canaries, but their number was small, only 4. Xiao Ran didn't act. If he absorbed Chong Ingxiong's ability, he would still need these women to relieve his urges. At most, he'd wear a raincoat, just like when he relieved his urges at Qingxing building. This was the difference between home flowers and wildflowers. Then, Xiao Ran went up to the 5th floor. This was also the highest floor of the entire building. It was all suites, each ridiculously large. A single bathroom alone was over 100 square meters, larger than many people's entire apartments. However, the doors were locked. Force entry? Xiao Ran thought for a moment and used spatial cutting. This ability naturally couldn't cut through metal, but it still had a slight force, and Xiao Ran could discern the structure of the lock core through his spatial perception. So, with a gentle flick, the lock opened. It was an old-fashioned lock. If it had been electronic, Xiao Ran would have had to resort to violence. He went in and quickly found 3 people in the bedroom. 1 man and 2 women, 1 old and 2 young. Therefore, the old man must be Chong Baolong, and the 2 young women were canaries. Oh, no wonder there were only 4 on the 4th floor. The others had been called up to serve him. Xiao Ran didn't act. Instead, he quietly retreated. The 5th floor should be where Chong Baolong, his 2 sons, and his grandchildren lived. Chong Shuli had already died at the police station, so there should be a total of 7 people here. Chong Baolong, his 2 sons, and 2 grandsons and 2 granddaughters. Oh, and Chong Ingxiong and his wife? That would add 2 more people. Wait, and the beauties serving him nightly? How many people would that be? Hard to say. Kill Chong Ingxiong first. Now, all the Chong family's henchmen have been wiped out by Xiao Ran. The only ones left, besides the female family members, were the direct descendants of the Chong family. And the only one who could truly pose a threat to Xiao Ran was Chong Yingxiong. Therefore, he needed to deal with this Vice President Chong first. Once Chong Yingxiong was dead, the others were irrelevant. What did Vice President Chong look like? Xiao Ran vaguely remembered, because this person had been in the news. Interestingly, Chong Baolong only had 2 sons. The eldest son should be over 50, while the second son, Chong Yingxiong, should be around 50. Someone fitting that age profile should be easy to find. He entered the second room. He still used spatial slicing to open the door. Heh, I'm a genius. Xiao Ran stepped into the room. 3 people were sleeping there, a man and 2 women. The man was over 50, likely Chong Baolong's eldest son. Of the 2 women, one was also over 50, and the other was only in her 20s. So, the over 50-year-old was the eldest son's official wife, and the young woman in her 20s was called to warm his bed? Hiss, letting the official wife and the mistress lie together? That a bit morally outrageous. Xiao Ran still didn't make a move and quietly retreated. Logically, the third room should be Chong Yingxiong's. Xiao Ran repeated the trick, opened the door, and quietly slipped inside. Without even entering the bedroom, he found only one person on the bed, a man in his 40s. Chong Yingxiong, no doubt. This man is so disciplined. His father and brother are both surrounded by women. Yet he's all alone? Wait. Xiao Ran noticed that Chong Yingxiong's heartbeat, which had been very stable, suddenly quickened, and his whole body began to radiate intense heat. He's awake. Hiss. Are ability users' senses so sharp? He hadn't made a single sound. No. Chong Yingxiong must have been woken by a crisis premonition, but he didn't know what was actually happening or even that someone had entered the room. That means he could still ambush him. Xiao Ran stopped moving, hiding behind the sofa. He waited for Chong Yingxiong to come out on his own. Sure enough, just a second later, snap, the light came on. Under his spatial perception, even though Xiao Ran couldn't see Chong Yingxiong, he clearly and precisely tracked his every move. The other party came out. From a bedroom, Chong Yingxiong walked out, wrapped in a bathrobe. As the second son of the Chong family, and also an ability user, he was actually the linchpin that allowed the Chong family to maintain its status. That's why his room was especially well heated, over 20 degrees Celsius. So what if it consumed a lot of electricity? Was that something a person of his status should worry about? Let the subordinates collect energy. He had been woken by a sudden tremor, not knowing what was wrong, just feeling uneasy. After the apocalypse, he suddenly developed this peculiar sense, and he had tested it. When someone pointed a gun at his back, even if he couldn't see them at all, that same tremor would occur, as if it were an early warning. So, although he didn't know what was happening, he remained cautious. Stepping out of the bedroom, he swept his gaze around. The room was quiet, not at all like whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 3 ice shards suddenly shot towards him, silently. The crisis premonition saved his life again. Chong Yingxiong let out a low roar, spun around, and with a wave of his hand, unleashed a large fireball. The fireball's temperature was extremely high. The 3 ice shards instantly melted into water. Although they still passed through the fireball and hit Chong Yingxiong, they caused not the slightest damage, as if he'd merely been splashed with some water. It wasn't as if it was just a splash of water. Xiao Ran sighed inwardly. Ability users are truly hard to kill. Let's try a different angle. His spatial gate could now open up to 5 meters away from Xiao Ran at any angle. So, Chong Yingxiong spun around sharply again, and another fireball shot out. Boom! The fireball traveled several meters before dissipating, and the 3 ice shards were once again melted. Damn it, that kid no. 9 didn't absorb several abilities, did he? How come the ice shards he conjured are so weak? Chong Yingxiong shouldn't have absorbed any abilities, right? So the ice shards I'm conjuring are too weak. Could it be that the kid didn't go all out back then? That's right. Since he wasn't a fire ability user, the kid wouldn't need to prioritize the ice shard's coldness. Instead, he'd use them as piercing weapons, so the kid deliberately controlled their temperature to avoid expending too much ability. This should be a sign of strong combat prowess. After all, no one's ability is a bottomless pit. But this also meant the ice shards Xiao Ran received were of poor quality. What the hell? Who's ambushing me? Chong Yingxiong roared, his face unable to hide his shock and tension. He had thought he was the only lucky one, the only person in the world with superpowers. But now, eerie ice shards were shooting at him from different angles, yet there was no attacker visible. This left him baffled, astonished, and terrified. But his first reaction was, someone just like him had arrived. Their ability was ice? But why couldn't he see anyone? Xiao Ran didn't answer. In the next instant, the spatial gate opened again. This time, it shot out ice shards and bullets. After 2 ice shard attacks, he believed he had lulled Chong Ingxiong into a false sense of security, making him assume he was an ice attribute ability user. So, if Chong Ingxiong still tried to counter with his old trick, it would be a dead end. Sure enough, Chong Ingxiong still conjured a fireball, but a great tremor immediately seized his heart. He saw dark flames, like flowing magma, erupting from his forehead, and the bullets were hurtling straight towards them. Xiao Ran's eyesight naturally couldn't track the bullet's trajectory, but his spatial perception clearly detected that as soon as the bullets hit the dark flames, they melted at an incredibly fast speed. Holy crap! Bullets are made of metal, and their speed is incredible. You can actually melt them, and in such a short amount of time. However, while Xiao Ran merely grumbled inwardly, Chong Ingxiong was utterly terrified, his scalp tingling. His flame ability had 2 attack modes. The first was to conjure fireballs with his hand. These fireballs reached several hundred degrees Celsius and could travel up to 5 meters before immediately extinguishing and disappearing. The second was to breathe intense flames from his mouth. Its attack range was very short, only half a meter, but the flame temperature could reach up to 1,000 degrees Celsius. Besides these, he had another ability that couldn't strictly be considered an attack method, turning a certain part of his body into magma. This area was only a few square centimeters, but its temperature could reach several thousand degrees Celsius or even higher, as it was simply impossible to measure. This ability would automatically activate under extreme tension, excitement, and similar emotions. That's why he had no women around him. He'd accidentally killed several of them. This last ability was incredibly powerful for self-preservation. It could burn through almost any attack. However, it consumed an immense amount of his ability. Just one activation left him drenched in sweat, feeling utterly drained. What terrified him was that he still didn't know where his opponent was. How could he counterattack if he didn't know where the attacker was? Whoosh, 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 a dozen steel rods suddenly appeared and shot silently towards Chong Ingxiong. Rebars slammed into him. While not as fast as a bullet, it still clocked in at about 20 meters per second. How could Chong Ingxiong possibly evade that? Not only had he only enhanced his body once, even Xiao Ran, who had acquired a total of about 9 abilities, could barely reach a maximum speed of 20 meters per second, unless the ability itself was body enhancement, like that mutated husky, whose speed far exceeded this even in its initial strengthened state. What to do? There was only one option: face it head-on. Chong Ingxiong gritted his teeth. He could only rely on his danger premonition to avoid vital spots as much as possible. Then, he fully unleashed his black flame ability. As the rebars struck, their tips visibly melted, turning into molten iron that splattered everywhere. With his life on the line, he performed beyond his usual capacity, with 5 points of black flame appearing simultaneously on his body, melting 5 of the rebars. The others missed, but only the last one broke through Chong Ingxiong's defense, piercing through his body with a thud. Thanks to his danger premonition, the rebar that hit him was the least harmful, merely piercing his left shoulder without damaging any vital organs. Bang! Just then, the door was kicked open, and several people rushed in. There were old and young, men and women. These were other members of the Chong family, including several women who served as companions. Second brother, Chong Baolong, still seemed quite spirited. He should have been over 70, yet he moved with spry steps, clearly getting a good amount of exercise. Well, how else could he have the energy to sleep with 2 women every night? They were all greatly alarmed. In their eyes, Chong Ingxiong was supposed to be invincible, but now he was in a truly horrific state, impaled by a rebar. Their gaze then locked onto Xiao Ran. From their vantage point, they could clearly see Xiao Ran hiding behind the sofa. Without hesitation, Chong Baolong raised the gun in his hand, pointing it at Xiao Ran. "Hurry, help second brother. Kill this scoundrel." They had rushed out upon hearing the commotion, but in these times, who wasn't cautious, as if facing a formidable enemy? So, even the beautiful women who serve as companions each had a gun. Though there was some hesitation, every one of them raised their muzzles. Their target was Xiao Ran. Xiao Ran lunged, changing his position, then adjusted his spatial gate to separate himself from Chong Ingxiong, Chong Baolong, and the others. With the current size the spatial gate could open, as long as he wasn't attacked from both front and back, it could fully protect him, making him impervious. Being attacked from all sides was still very dangerous. After all, even if Xiao Ran's body had been strengthened 9 times, it was still far from bulletproof. Being hit by one of Chong Ingxiong's fireballs would likely be quite damaging. There was no helping it. This was a weakness of spatial ability users, at least for now, lacking powerful life-saving capabilities. In fact, the spatial gate was absolutely the strongest defensive tool in the world, though it had various limitations. Humans are rarely satisfied, aren't they? What one can't have is always the best. With a thought, Xiao Ran's spatial perception had already mapped everyone's position in his mind. Whoosh, 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 bullets flew out. Bang, 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 Chong Baolong and the others didn't even let out a grunt. All were shot in the forehead, dying instantly. This included the beautiful women with good looks and figures. What did beauty matter? Pointing a gun at him and about to pull the trigger made them enemies. Being merciful to enemies? Foolish. Xiao Ran never denied his lustful nature, but in such an apocalypse, life naturally came first, and only then came enjoyment. Whoosh, 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 several more rebars shot out. Target, Chong Xiong. He hadn't forgotten his main objective for this trip, nor would he give his opponent any time to breathe. Facing this attack, Chong Xiong was powerless to counter. His abilities were exhausted. He revealed a tragic smile and said, "Who exactly are you, why?" Hood, hood, hood. He was already impaled by several more rebars, but he seemed completely unaware, staring at Xiao Ran, unwilling to close his eyes even in death. Xiao Ran walked over, pressed his hand down, and a warm current surged. He knew the ability was now his. Change occurred instantly. The maximum size of the spatial gate increased by another 5 meters, but its casting range did not increase, remaining at 5 meters. Spatial perception increased by 1 meter, now able to fully feedback everything within a 16-meter radius. And the maximum range of spatial severance reached 9 meters. Xiao Ran collected all the bodies into his dimensional space, planning to dump them on the road once he returned to the villa. The side effects of absorbing the ability hadn't appeared yet, so he wasn't in a hurry to go to the 4th floor. Instead, he meticulously searched the 5th floor again. No living people. He did, however, find a pile of USB drives. Upon opening them, he found various types of content. Videos of the Chong family threatening residents to forcibly acquire land, with the most egregious showing husbands being forced to watch their wives suffer indignities, ultimately having to sign agreements in humiliation. There were also secretly filmed scenes of bribery, offering money and women, and the Chong family forcing women for their own pleasure. Finally, there were videos of the Chong family dealing with their enemies, executing them in a secret room, tormenting them to death. This was all done before the apocalypse. This family truly deserved to die. Every single one of them had blood on their hands, countless lives. Xiao Ran felt regret. He shouldn't have let them die so painlessly. But at the time, he must have been prioritizing safety, ensuring every bullet precisely struck the brains of those people. How could he have known he'd see these videos now? He knew that the rise of parvenus was never clean, and their hands were bound to be stained with blood, especially for families like the Changs, who had washed ashore and became respectable. They must have committed all sorts of heinous acts. Still, seeing these videos was quite shocking. So people could be this evil. And after the apocalypse, with the Chong family having even fewer inhibitions, wouldn't their evil deeds be magnified tenfold, even 100-fold? But most of the owners in the other villas in this community were still alive, which was strange. A rabbit doesn't eat the grass around its burrow. How could that be? So why didn't the Chong family target these people? Xiao Ran found it odd, but this question only flashed through his mind before fading, because his body began to feel hot. The side effects had arrived. Xiao Ran went to the 4th floor and woke up the remaining 4 beautiful women. He didn't even need to say anything. The 4 women enthusiastically and proactively approached him. Clearly, their job was to cater to men, just like Yen Qin, Bai Rui, and others from the Qinghong building. Xiao Ran got dressed and thoroughly inspected the massive building again. First, out of caution, to make sure no one had slipped through the cracks. Second, to understand the building's structure, as he would certainly need to renovate it. Unbeknownst to him, the long night had finally passed. A new day dawned. Every morning, as day broke, the heavy fog would recede like the tide. After the heavy snowfall, there was no trace of fog during the day, and visibility was excellent. This was already the 42nd day since the apocalypse began, and Xiao Ran, despite working all night, was still full of vigor. After absorbing his abilities, he felt as if he'd been given a shot of adrenaline, brimming with energy. Staying up all night was nothing. He had completely figured out the manor's layout, and the next step was to make adjustments. Some places he disliked had to be torn down, like that pageant hall. Was he really the kind of person who needed something like that? From a defensive standpoint, this manor is far inferior to the villa. Forget explosives, You could easily break through the windows with just a hammer. However, its cold weather insulation is truly excellent. It has excellent insulation, and it's equipped with air conditioning, floor heating, and even fireplaces. In terms of warmth, this manor was truly impeccable. Furthermore, it boasted numerous entertainment and ample sports facilities. The only drawback is the insufficient security. Xiao Ran pondered. It was freezing cold now, and this place was very remote, so the chances of anyone finding their way here should be slim. Therefore, a less than stellar defense wasn't entirely unacceptable. Was he not afraid of Hope Base? First, he was also eyeing Hope Camp. Getting to Xishan from here was quite close, but what if he started from Jufu Community or Qinghong Tower? That would take 2 to 3 hours. Second, would Hope Camp find its way here? It was possible, but Hope Camp had already been searching the entire city. Hadn't Xiao Ran encountered Youth Number 9 and Hua Mingli's group? This indicated that even living far away, encounters were still possible. Furthermore, the Chong family and so many community residents were still alive and well, which suggested that Hope Camp hadn't turned its attention this way yet. Third, with the snow so deep now, cars were definitely unusable. So, even though the straight-line distance to Xishan was only about 10 kilometers, finding this place wouldn't be easy. Taihu Lake had absolutely no landmarks, making it easy to get lost and wander off course. Moreover, he couldn't reinforce the main manor building itself, but there was still a massive estate that could be renovated. For instance, the landmines he'd obtained from the military camp. Setting them up in a perimeter, anyone who dared to sneak in would be blown to smithereens. Also, I can set up machine guns in various rooms. If they could be combined with infrared capture for automatic aiming and firing, wouldn't that indirectly boost the defense? Of course, figuring out how to combine infrared surveillance with automatic firing wasn't something Xiao Ran could solve. He wasn't an automation or mechanical engineering major. I can keep an eye out for relevant talents later. As for materials, I have plenty in my space. I'll ask Han Yun and the others back home if they have any related expertise. But Xiao Ran looked at the villas in the distance. Why were there so many living people here? He wasn't anti-humanity, nor did he dislike seeing others alive. He was simply puzzled. How could the Chong family allow these people to exist? It was understandable before, but with the apocalypse, why hadn't they looted or enslaved them? Are there ability users there too? Xiao Ran mused. Do ability users deter each other, so no one dares to act recklessly? No, that's not right. Judging by Chong Yingxiong's reaction earlier, he clearly had never encountered another ability user and thought he was the only one in the world. So, his previous deduction couldn't be true. What else could it be then? Xiao Ran racked his brain, but couldn't think of any other possibilities. How about I go check it out myself? Xiao Ran tapped the table and ultimately rejected the idea. He'd observe for a few more days first. Besides, as long as others didn't provoke him, he couldn't be bothered with them. Look, there were thousands of neighbors in the community. Before they came to provoke Xiao Ran, had he ever paid attention to them? He was actually quite reasonable. After a while, the 4 women from last night finally realized something was amiss and came out looking for people. Xiao Ran simply told them that this place now belonged to him. You may leave. I won't stop you, he said indifferently. Could the 4 women possibly leave? The snow outside was taller than a 2-story building. Even if they dressed in the warmest clothes, they'd die within 10 minutes of going out. So, no one would be that foolish. Besides, they were originally selling their bodies for a comfortable life. Did it matter who they sold themselves to? In comparison, Xiao Ran was not only young and somewhat handsome, but also physically robust, something they had all experienced firsthand last night. Without even thinking, they readily decided to stay, as long as Xiao Ran was willing to provide for them. For now, Xiao Ran would indeed support them, but he had other plans. Everything that happened at the Chong family manor last night was quiet, and no one could go outside in this weather. So, even though this was actually a residential community, not a single household discovered anything amiss. The Chong family manor had changed hands. Apart from the 4 women in the manor, who were also bewildered, how could so many people from the Chong family have simply vanished? Xiao Ran wasn't in a hurry to leave. Whether it was the villa or Qinghong group, he had left enough food and water, so there was no need to worry about people starving if he didn't return for a few days. But it was freezing cold, and no one came out at all. After a day of watching, Xiao Ran found nothing. Forget it. I'll go back to the villa tomorrow morning. That night, Xiao Ran went upstairs to sleep alone. It's always wise to be on guard. Caution is the parent of safety. The next day, the heavy fog dissipated, but the sky remained gloomy. Xiao Ran first went outside, retrieved the hovercraft, drove it over, and had the 4 women board it. He decided to make this manor his new home, So naturally, these 4 women had no right to stay here. Where would he take them? Qinghong Tower. Did the 4 women have the right to refuse? After driving for over 2 hours, Xiao Ran finally arrived at Qinghong Tower, handed the 4 women over to Bai Ruwei and the others, and then returned to the villa to inform the other women about the move. In truth, the women didn't want to move. People naturally developed attachments to a place they had lived in for a long time. Besides, this place was so comfortable and the conditions were excellent, so why leave? But what could they do against Xiao Ran? Leaving everything else aside, if Xiao Ran didn't give them food and water, wouldn't they be utterly finished? Let's go. Fortunately, the hovercraft's cabin was spacious enough for all 9 women to fit without being cramped. So, Xiao Ran once again took on the role of driver, and after about 3 hours, they finally arrived at the Chong family manor. From now on, it would be called the Xiao family manor. Upon entering the manor and discovering that its conditions were as good as, if not better than, the villas, the women were all overjoyed. The villa was nice, but it was too small, especially Leopard, who ran around the house, utterly delighted. Xiao Ran smiled. Ever since the underground garage collapsed, Leopard had been cooped up at home for many days, almost getting sick from boredom. Now, with this run, it immediately perked up. Wow, there's a private cinema here, a badminton court, a yoga room, and a swimming pool. The women continuously shrieked, very excited. If Xiao Ran were to say they had to move back to the villa now, the women would probably all whine and try to make him change his mind. Xiao Ran chuckled. From enjoyment perspective, this place was indeed far superior. It was just, the energy consumption was also high. How many square meters was the villa, and how many was this place? Fortunately, heating could be managed by burning firewood in the fireplaces, which was the biggest drain. And Xiao Ran's firewood reserves, well, they were more than just a lot. So, the fuel that had to be consumed was mainly for lighting and some entertainment and fitness facilities like the private cinema, treadmills, etc., which actually didn't consume much. Xiao Ran roughly estimated that the fuel he had would last for at least 3 years. Thus, he could calmly address the fuel issue. Which of you understands mechanical automation or electronic information? Xiao Ran asked the 9 women. Han Yun and Yun Wantong were both teachers, but they specialized in humanities. Su Qimei had been apprehended while still in university, and she was studying law, so even if she had completed her degree, she couldn't offer any help. Su Xian Ran and Zhou Yinsu were also humanities majors. Girls seemed to have a particular fondness for liberal arts. Jiang Yuning was no different, a clerk in public relations, completely unrelated to mechanical automation or information engineering. Wang Lulu, unfortunately, she'd been taken care of since her first year of university and dropped out directly in her second. Zhang Jingya and Zhong Lei were science students, but their fields were still not what Xiao Ran needed. So when Xiao Ran asked, all 9 girls shook their heads. Naturally disappointed, Xiao Ran could only assign them a simple task: reinforce the doors and windows. Xiao Ran had a minimum requirement. If someone truly broke into the house, he wanted to at least hear the commotion, rather than waiting for them to be right in front of him and only reacting based on a crisis warning. He was used to having everything under control. He took out a large quantity of iron plates, screws, nails, and necessary equipment, then sent the 9 girls off to work. After all, they couldn't just live idly, waiting for death every day. The 9 girls had no complaints, as they also lived there, and this was equally for their own safety. It wasn't long before dusk fell, so they ate dinner first. After dinner, Xiao Ran went to the swimming pool. He had already filled and heated the pool before leaving that morning, so now the water was warm and inviting. He could swim in it and use it as a bathhouse. How refreshing. He had been looking forward to the pool for a long time. A night passed. Early in the morning, the 9 girls resumed their work from yesterday, reinforcing doors and windows, while Xiao Ran departed in his hovercraft. There hadn't been enough time yesterday, so today he planned to move the people from Qinghong building to the villa. The villa had 4 floors and could house 16 people, so it wasn't exactly crowded. First, Xiao Ran didn't want to abandon the villa. In case of any accident, it would be his fallback. So, Xiao Ran occasionally returned to resupply the villa. For Xiao Ran, the consumption for a small villa housing only 16 people was, of course, trivial. Bai Ruwei and the others were initially somewhat resistant, but after arriving at the villa, they also felt that this place was much better than Qinghong building. Not to mention better heating, they could also take showers here, and it was cozier, felt more like home, making them feel human again. After settling them in, Xiao Ran left a large amount of food and fresh water, enough to last them half a month, then quickly left before dark. Any later, and he would have to spend the night on the hovercraft. Sure enough, by the time he arrived at the manor, it was dark within half an hour, and a thick fog emerged from nowhere, rapidly covering the entire world. Xiao Ran's family, meanwhile, gathered cozily around the dining table for dinner, which Wang Lulu had prepared, with the other girls helping out. During the day, they had all been busy reinforcing doors and windows, and everyone had expended a lot of physical strength, so they ate with great relish and consumed a lot. How could Xiao Ran be stingy with food? Eat as much as you want. After dinner, Xiao Ran began his physical training. Equipment was no longer of much use. Xiao Ran first practiced running, then boxed in an empty room. There was no specific technique, just freely unleashing the power within him, and also strengthening his use of his supernatural abilities. In the future, the effects of bullets, kinetic rebar, and similar tools would gradually weaken, and the only thing he could truly rely on would be his supernatural abilities, so he had to develop them well. His spatial ability definitely wasn't limited to just 3 powers. He hoped to possess a 4th, 5th, and even more. Early in the morning, Xiao Ran stood by the window, watching the thick fog rapidly dispersing. The fog dissipated during the day and settled densely at night, which seemed to be related to the sun. But he wasn't an astronomer, so he could only guess at the outcome. As for whether it was true and why, he couldn't grasp it at all. In fact, what good would knowing do? Could it change the extreme weather? What he was concerned about and curious about now were his new neighbors. How exactly did you survive? Why didn't the Chong family target you? As he was pondering, he saw someone emerge from a villa, heading towards the manor in a very peculiar manner. It was a fully armored person, so heavily bundled that Xiao Ran couldn't even discern their gender. They were sliding over on a canoe. A canoe, truly. The snow surface was slick, and the canoe provided excellent buoyancy, so, with just a push of a paddle, the canoe could glide a considerable distance forward. Human ingenuity truly knew no bounds. Since the courtyard walls were buried under the snow, the person could paddle over unimpeded. And Xiao Ran had done something else yesterday. He'd cleared the snow from the main entrance, so he wouldn't have to climb out a window every time he left. The windows had been reinforced and sealed with iron plates, making them impossible to open, in fact. So, when the person reached the entrance, not noticing or expecting a slope there, the canoe slid straight down with a loud thump, crashing heavily into the main gate. Fortunately, for a prominent family like the Changs, the main gate was practically their signboard. Naturally, effort had been put into it. It was not only large and heavy, but also extremely sturdy, so it wasn't broken open or damaged. However, the person in the canoe was a bit unfortunate, thrown out, and similarly crashing into the door. Luckily, he was wearing enough layers that he didn't end up bruised and battered. Xiao Ran was curious about these new neighbors, so he went down to the first floor. Open the door, welcome the guest. As the door opened, Xiao Ran immediately activated his spatial gate, thinking if you dare to harm me, I'll kill you instantly. Additionally, he observed the person using his spatial perception. Unlike the impenetrable density of walls, even the densest fabric actually had pores, invisible to the naked eye, but under spatial perception, they were all loopholes. Through layer after layer of fabric, he clearly knew if the person was carrying weapons, what their build was like, and whether they were male or female. He gave a quick scan and then deactivated his spatial perception. Firstly, the person wasn't carrying any weapons. Secondly, it was a man. No need to scan for further details. Uninvited, I hope you'll be lenient with me. The person spoke, revealing a deep male voice, quite magnetic and pleasant to listen to. He smiled. May I come in? Xiao Ran made a welcoming gesture. The person first patted the snow off himself at the doorway. He'd fallen into the snow earlier when he crashed, so he naturally had snow clinging to him, and then he stepped inside. This action showed him to be a meticulous person. Xiao Ran casually closed the door. It was too cold. Keeping the door open would let in freezing air, and even with plenty of firewood, he couldn't afford such waste. The person removed the coverings from his head, layers of scarves and goggles, etc. Finally, a middle-aged man's face was revealed, looking to be in his early 40s, quite handsome, and with a tall build. A slew of terms popped into Xiao Ran's mind. Gigolo, sugar baby. Indeed, even as a middle-aged man, he still possessed strong charm, especially for more mature women, who would likely be most drawn to this type of older man. It's the apocalypse. Why are you so handsome? Thumbs down. He grumbled inwardly, though his face remained expressionless as he asked, Is there something you need? The handsome middle-aged man smiled and said, It was presumptuous of me not to introduce myself. My name is Zhuang Jiechen. I live in this community, the owner of Building 16. I used to be the chairman of Xinlin Group, but, well, let's not dwell on my past identity. Xiao Ran nodded. My name is Xiao Ran. Simple as that. He wasn't planning on making friends. Zhuang Jiachen was clearly very astute. Xiao Ran's cold reply didn't displease him, at least not visibly. His face still wore a warm smile as he said, I'm a curious person, so I'll just ask directly. Didn't a large group of the Chong family live here? How come they seem to have disappeared? Xiao Ran showed a faint smile. How do you know the Chong family is gone? You're very problematic. Zhuang Jiachen maintained his unchanging smile and said, Because I observe this place every day. I used to always see many people through the windows, but now they're all gone, replaced by you and some beautiful ladies, which is why I said what I did. Observing the Chong family every day? Xiao Ran shrugged. The Chong family sold this place to me, so they naturally moved out. That's clearly a load of nonsense. But Zhuang Jiachen didn't look offended. On the contrary, he feigned surprise, appearing very astonished. When did they move out? At night, Xiao Ran replied blandly. So you wouldn't have seen it. With thick fog blanketing everything at night, could they possibly have moved? No, this selling the house story is far too outlandish. Zhuang Jiachen suddenly burst into laughter. After a good 10 seconds, he finally reined in his smile and said, You're truly amusing. But since you're unwilling to say, I naturally can't force you. I'll just say one thing. The Chong family wasn't good people. Their disappearance makes all the owners in our community very happy, and we warmly welcome Mr. Zhao's arrival. Xiao Ran nodded, finally voicing his own question. It's been over 40 days since the disaster began. How have all of you managed to survive? Zhuang Jiachen showed a look of recollection, his expression a mix of excitement and lingering fear. After a few seconds, he said, There's a highly capable individual in our community. A capable individual? A superpowered individual? Xiao Ran's heart stirred. He'd had such a guess before, but dismissed it. Now, Zhuang Jiachen was actually saying there was indeed an esper there, which genuinely surprised him. I'd like to hear the details, he said. Since Zhuang Jiachen had started, he had no intention of holding back, as this was the purpose of his visit. He explained, This capable individual is named Xia Lingchen. Before he retired, he was in the military, and his position was very high. Seeing Xiao Ran looking at him, he smiled and made a gesture indicating height. Even higher than you can imagine. He continued, The old master is from Sucheng, so after retirement, he retreated back to Sucheng. He chuckled. The number of people in all of Sucheng who knew the old master could be counted on one hand. Of course, it's different now. Many people know of his existence. On the day the disaster struck, about an hour before, the old master received a call from the higher-ups, warning him that extreme weather might occur. Because there wasn't enough time to evacuate him, they could only tell him to stockpile supplies as much as possible and prepare to face the disaster. However, the old master had been a soldier all his life, so he naturally wasn't willing to only look out for himself. Thus, he used his influence to rally everyone in the community to prepare supplies. Coincidentally, a family in the community was about to get married. Even more coincidentally, there's a resort hotel right next to our community, and their wedding was being held there, with 500 tables set up. Under the old master's leadership, we divided up all the food from those 500 banquet tables. Sure enough, an hour later, the toxic hail fell. Xiao Ran was startled. So, this capable individual wasn't a superpowered person, but rather an influential figure of high standing. He had hoped in vain. Because they had enough food and water, everyone in the community managed to survive this natural disaster, enduring for over 40 days. A surge of anger suddenly rose in Xiao Ran. Why hadn't the country notified ordinary people to prepare supplies? Only a select few? Weren't ordinary people's lives worth living? However, he quickly calmed down. Firstly, the country had only confirmed the extreme weather an hour in advance. So, even if a warning had been issued as emergency news at that time, what good would it have done? Secondly, in fact, those who died directly from a natural disaster were always a minority. Conversely, the crimes and malicious incidents triggered by panic were the real apocalypse. Therefore, once the country issued an early warning, the entire society would turn into a living hell. Just look at Xiao Ran's own community. Very few people died in the early stages of the disaster. Most deaths only began in the later stages. Thirdly, the country didn't know how long this disaster would last. What if it was only 3 to 5 days or half a month? Issuing a public notice that plunged society into chaos. What a massive disaster that would be after the natural catastrophe passed. So, the country did issue notices and warnings, but only to a very small number of people, to avoid triggering widespread panic. But no one knew this natural disaster would last so long, and looking at the current low temperatures, it might even continue for a year or several years. Xiao Ran fell into deep thought. Did national power truly still exist? The People's soldiers were indeed the most disciplined force, but as the disaster continued, food and water became major problems. Well, the water problem was mostly solved now, but what about food? The amount of food a single army consumes every day is immense. And Xiao Ran took a deep breath. There were also superpowered individuals. At first, superpowered individuals couldn't contend with conventional weapons and had to lie dormant. But as they grew stronger, would they still be so obedient and rule-abiding? Would they start thinking about seizing power and rising to prominence? Xiao Ran sighed inwardly. There was no going back. Nothing could go back. Unless superpowered individuals ceased to exist, this group of people would inevitably become the masters of the world. A great man once said, "Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun." And in this apocalyptic world, superpowered individuals represented the barrel of the gun. Mr. Xiao. Seeing Xiao Ran lost in thought, Zhuang Jiaqin softly called out. Xiao Ran nodded. He had kept his spatial perception active all along. Even if his mind wandered, if Zhuang Jiaqin made any unusual move, he would kill him immediately. He hated anyone handsomer than himself. So, what's the purpose of your visit? Xiao Ran asked. You can't just be bored, can you? Zhuang Jiaqin smiled. I don't know what kind of person Mr. Xiao is. I'll just explain the agreement our community reached with the Chong family. This sparked Xiao Ran's second point of curiosity. Why didn't the Chong family prey on their neighbors? Don't tell me the Chong family actually cared about human decency. That family had absolutely no heart. Please, Xiao Ran said faintly. Zhuang Jiaqin continued. After the hail stopped, the Chong family managed to leave using their convoy and even acquired guns from the police station. In the beginning, the Chong family actually set their sights on the community residents, on us. It was the old master again. He warned the Chong family that he had a satellite phone and could contact the higher-ups. He made calls every day, and if one day he didn't, well, the Eastern Military Command would lock onto the Chong family mansion and level it with missiles. The Chong family immediately chickened out. From then on, they lived and let live with us residents. Mr. Xiao. Zhuang Jiaqin looked at Xiao Ran with a serious expression. I don't know where the Chong family went or what happened to them, but since Mr. Xiao is living here now, I hope you can take their place and continue to uphold this agreement. Xiao Ran chuckled. Live and let live? Yes, Zhuang Jiaqin nodded. So, this was the purpose of his visit today. The mysterious disappearance of the entire Chong family. How could the community not be surprised and afraid? The Chong family had guns, and quite a few of them. But such a sinister force had vanished, as if into thin air. The Xiao Ran family, who had moved in, was incredibly suspicious and very frightening. These community residents feared Xiao Ran would harm them, so they had to make Xiao Ran understand that if he did, the consequences would be extremely severe. Missile bombardment. Are you scared or not? Others saying this might be bluffing, but their community had a truly influential figure. So, if you don't want to perish together, you'd best be like the Chong family. Mind your own business, and absolutely do not cross the line. Xiao Ran laughed. Don't worry, I've always gotten along well with my neighbors. Just ask the people in Jufu community. Has Xiao Ran ever actively harmed anyone? No, not a single one. He had an excellent reputation. How could Zhuang Jiaqin believe him? A ruthless individual who most likely wiped out the Chong family? I wouldn't believe a single word you say. But he believed Xiao Ran wasn't foolish. The stakes had been clearly explained to him. He was confident Xiao Ran wouldn't do anything stupid. Then I'll take my leave. He was about to depart. Wait, Mr. Xiao, anything else? Zhuang Jiaqin asked. Xiao Ran nodded, smiling. I should be allowed to visit my neighbors, shouldn't I? Zhuang Jiaqin was taken aback. The weather was so cold. He'd only made the trip to warn Xiao Ran. Otherwise, who would brave such frigid temperatures to go out? He thought for a moment, then said, as long as Mr. Xiao abides by the understanding that we all mind our own business, we'd be very welcoming to you visiting. All right, Xiao Ran said with a smile. Oh, I almost forgot. Zhuang Jiaqin slapped his forehead and pulled a walkie-talkie from his thick clothing. Communications are down now, so we can only rely on this thing to connect. It's too much trouble to go out. Xiao Ran took the walkie-talkie, a faint smile playing on his lips. Did you really almost forget? If I hadn't mentioned visiting the neighbors, would you have pulled out that walkie-talkie? Now there are walkie-talkies for communication, so do you still need to make house calls? After all, someone who could make the entire Chong family, lackeys and all, vanish was truly terrifying. It was best to avoid dealing with such a person if possible. I've already set the frequency. You just need to turn it on, Zhuang Jiechen instructed again. Then I'll take my leave. No need to see me off. Heh, I wasn't planning on it. Zhuang Jiechen departed, still using his canoe. Xiao Ran began to ponder how much of Zhuang Jiechen's words were credible. Touch that Xiao Lingsheng, and there'll be a missile strike that levels the place? If that were true, then no matter what, Xiao Ran wouldn't stay here. Having his life in someone else's hands was something he couldn't accept. But the disaster had lasted over 40 days. Did the Eastern Military Region truly still exist? Or rather, could it still function? Also, did Xiao Lingsheng really have a satellite phone, or was that a lie? No, the man's identity itself was questionable. Though Xiao Ran had never been an official, what were his usual pastimes? Thanks to his ex-wife refusing to give him pocket money, Xiao Ran had been forced to read free web novels. He developed a fondness for political thrillers, and thus had a slight understanding of officialdom. Could a person who could become a high-ranking official in the military possibly live here? Someone of that caliber would surely be assigned numerous bodyguards, with security at the highest or second highest level. To facilitate such security, the state wouldn't likely allow such an elder to reside in a compound like this. But if Xiao Lingsheng isn't a big shot, how did he know the apocalypse was coming in advance? Xiao Ran tapped the table with his finger. Did I just go in a circle only to end up back where I started? Is Xiao Lingsheng actually an ability user, and his power is foresight? However, I was reborn, so I already had my ability before the disaster. How could Xiao Lingsheng have had an ability earlier? Yet for Xiao Ran to believe Xiao Lingsheng was a retired big shot from above, he found it even less likely. Why think so much? Why not just go over and find out directly? Xiao Ran laughed at himself for overcomplicating the issue. As the saying goes, a wise man doesn't stand under a tottering wall. If Xiao Lingsheng could truly summon missiles, then Xiao Ran wouldn't stay here for another day. He'd move immediately. He picked up the walkie-talkie, turned it on, and said, "Hello. Hello, this is Xiao Ran from Building 8. I'd like to ask which building Elder Xiao Lingsheng lives in. I have something I need to ask him in person." Silence followed his words, only the static hiss of the walkie-talkie. But at the same time, many residents in the compound tuned their walkie-talkies to another frequency. He wants to find the Elder? What for? Does he want to harm the Elder? Should we tell him? Tell him. Old Zhuang already told him the risks involved. He probably wants to confirm it himself. Right, let him talk to the Elder. Let him settle down completely. All right, switch the frequency back and tell him the Elder's residence. Xiao Ran waited for a moment, then a voice came through the walkie-talkie. The Elder lives in Building 3. Thanks. He turned off the walkie-talkie. Xiao Ran prepared himself, which took him nearly half an hour. He was mainly looking up information. 3 months before the disaster, he had downloaded a massive amount of files, filling thousands of portable hard drives. Then, carrying a bag and strapping on his skis, he headed out. The estate was vast. Xiao Ran skied past the wall area and found Building 3. No one else had the habit of clearing snow from their doorways, so Xiao Ran knocked on a window. A third-story window. After a moment, the window opened, and Xiao Ran climbed inside. Warmth enveloped him. As expected of a true wealthy district, every household had a fireplace. Otherwise, the fuel should have run out long ago, and even if every house had a generator, they would likely have fallen into a power outage. But this was Dongshan, and there were trees everywhere near the compound. So if they had cut down a large number of trees for replenishment when the hail stopped and the heavy snow hadn't yet begun, they could easily have lasted until now. Xiao Ran took off his skis and looked ahead. It was the person who had opened the window for him. Oh, a beauty! Even with Xiao Ran's severely discerning eye, he couldn't help but be amazed. The woman in front of him was around 20 years old, and her looks were absolutely stunning, even a touch higher than Su Xinran's. Su Xinran's beauty could score a 95, while this woman was a 98 or 99. Why not a perfect 100? Because there was no absolute standard, and there might always be someone even more beautiful. So, 99 was her deserved place. Her figure was slender, especially her long legs. My goodness, perfectly straight and toned, a cut above Zhou Yunsu. Of course, she had a flaw. Her chest wasn't big enough. No, it was probably just Xiao Ran's demands being too high. The women in his home started at a D cup. This woman probably had a C cup, which was certainly not small, just not up to Xiao Ran's personal standard. Her dark hair cascaded like clouds. Her skin was as white as jade. Her lips a tender pink, her eyes bright, her teeth pearly, and her neck gracefully curved like a swan's. Because the house was warm enough, she wore casual clothes yet her nearly perfect curves were still evident. Except her chest wasn't big enough. Xiao Ran sighed inwardly. Was he obsessed with breasts? Always fixating on cup sizes? Grandpa is waiting for you in the living room, the beauty said faintly, tossing her head as she headed for the door. Xiao Ran glanced around. The room's decor clearly belonged to a young girl. While the overall color scheme wasn't pink, but rather sky blue, two pink stuffed animals on the bed gave away that this was a woman's boudoir. Following the beautiful woman, Xiao Ran arrived on the first floor. The villa itself had 3 stories. Some villas, like the Chong family mansion, were 4 stories and even 5, making it the tallest building in the entire complex. In the living room on the first floor, as expected, an old man was reading a newspaper, wearing presbyopic glasses. This setup, Xiao Ran inwardly shook his head. How many days has it been since the apocalypse? Does this old man still have unread or unfinished newspapers? This immediate pose of reading a newspaper, the image of an old cadre, naturally leapt to mind. But it was a bit too much. Xiao Ran's suspicions deepened. He plopped down directly opposite the old man. Only then did the old man lower his newspaper, sizing up Xiao Ran. Young man, you wanted to see me? Now you've seen me. Speak your mind. The old man's face was stern and imposing. Xiao Ran smiled. Elder, you're truly a soldier through and through. Your body is so robust. The old man looked well over 70, but when he sat, his back was ramrod straight. His facial features were sharp and resolute, and his eyes gleamed with spirit, the kind that could intimidate petty scoundrels. The old man, naturally, was Xiao Lingsheng. He allowed a hearty laugh. Having been a soldier for decades, though I've accumulated a fair share of injuries, the discipline and habits from the military have stayed with me. Xiao Ran gave a thumbs up. Elder, your wounds and spilled blood were for the nation. I admire that greatly. This was the honest truth. Xiao Ran had always respected soldiers, especially the older generation. Back when the nation wasn't yet strong, there were always some insignificant clowns trying to challenge them. They fought fierce battles, and only then did decades of peace follow. However, the older generation of soldiers truly paid too high a price, especially that battle in the early days of the nation's founding, which could only be described as brutal. Xiao Lingqing's expression was calm as he said, Young man, you didn't come to see me just to flatter, did you? His directness, with no beating around the bush, further confirmed his military bearing. Xiao Ran chuckled. I just have a few suspicions. Speak. Xiao Lingqing gestured for him to continue. First, I have no doubt about your identity as a soldier, elder, and I admire your contributions, Xiao Ran said. This is my fundamental premise, and I ask you to believe me. I bear you no ill will whatsoever. He spoke these words with utmost sincerity, for he respected soldiers to his very core. However, there was one thing he absolutely had to confirm, because he didn't want to live under the constant threat of missiles crashing down. Xiao Ran continued, but before you retired, elder, were you truly that in the military? He made a gesture indicating a sky-high position. Is there anything to doubt? The beautiful woman standing behind Xiao Lingsheng unexpectedly interjected, looking somewhat insulted. Without the information my grandfather received from the nation, it's no exaggeration to say at least half the people here would have starved or died of thirst by now. And you dare to doubt my grandfather? Xiao Lingsheng, however, glared at the young woman. You really are domineering, not even allowing others to have their suspicions. Xiao Ran remained unfazed. I naturally have reasonable grounds. Firstly, an elder retiring from such a high position, and yet there isn't even a single bodyguard at home? The beautiful woman immediately replied, Grandpa likes peace and quiet, and besides, do we even need to worry about public safety in our country? Xiao Ran chuckled. Good public safety is one thing, but the elder's status and rank are clearly there. How could there be no bodyguards? That really doesn't make sense. The young woman scoffed. Your suspicions are baseless. If Grandpa didn't hold an extremely high position, how could he possibly know state-level secrets? Precisely. That's what makes it interesting, Xiao Ran said with a smile. The Xia family grandfather and granddaughter stared at him, and Xiao Ran stared back at them, even casually crossing his legs. You just wait. The beautiful woman, looking very angry, stomped up to the 3rd floor. Before long, stomping footsteps were heard descending again. The young woman came down holding a laptop, opened it, and turned the screen toward Xiao Ran. See for yourself. The young woman eyed Xiao Ran with disdain. What's your name? Xiao Ran asked, looking at the young woman, but not at the screen. He maintained a stubborn demeanor. The young woman, exasperated, replied, My name is Xia Chuchio. Xiao Ran couldn't help but chuckle. That's an interesting name. Though if it were end of summer, beginning of autumn, it'd be even funnier. This earned him a roll of Xiao Chuchio's eyes. Only then did Xiao Ran look at the screen. It was a Baidu page, though offline since the network was down. However, it clearly stated Xiao Lingqing's identity. TSK, indeed a big shot in the military, practically a sky-high figure. After seeing it, Xiao Ran let out a long sigh of relief. Well, what do you have to say now? Xiao Chuchio demanded. Xiao Ran glanced at her, calmly saying, what can Baidu prove? Do you take me for an internet novice who doesn't know that Baidu entries can be self-edited and written? Xiao Chuchio was slightly surprised because most people had a mistaken perception of online encyclopedias, thinking they were official introductions, which was completely untrue. You could completely make up an entry, then randomly concoct a story. It could be a person, a place, or even a historical event. Authority? Bullshit. A smile played on Xiao Ran's lips. It would have been better if Xiao Chuchio hadn't pulled out this Baidu page. The fact that she did actually confirmed his suspicions, because he had checked his information beforehand, and although his offline download was definitely incomplete, there was no entry for Xiao Lingqing on it. However, this didn't prove anything. Some influential figures were quite low-key, especially those involved in secret scientific research. It would be strange if you could find them online. But Xiao Chuchio specifically brought out Baidu to show him. It seemed like proof, but in reality, it was full of holes. So, Elder, you are indeed a soldier, but definitely not a high-ranking official, right? Xiao Ran chuckled. Without waiting for the grandfather and granddaughter to deny it, he waved his hand. I'm just saying this casually. You don't need to rush to deny it. Besides, I've always had nothing but respect for soldiers, regardless of their rank. This is my token of sincerity, my respect, and homage to soldiers. Please accept it, Elder. I'm leaving. No need to see me out. Xiao Ran put down the backpack he had brought, which contained some fruits. You can hoard food, but what about fruit? People must be quite lacking in vitamin supplements now. He stood up, ready to leave, but after 2 steps, he slapped his forehead and turned back towards the stairs. Could he still use the front door now? He said not to see him off, but how could Xiao Chuchio not see him off? Because Xiao Ran was definitely going back the way he came, which naturally meant going back through her private room. Having a strange man enter her private room, she felt a sense of shame, as if all her secrets had been exposed. Who exactly are you? She whispered as they went upstairs. And what about the Chong family? Xiao Ran had already entered her private room. He turned his head and smiled. If you're worried about the Chong family, then relax, they'll never be coming back. As for me, as I said before, I only respect soldiers on the condition that you don't provoke me. All right, goodbye. Xiao Ran left the Xia family's place and returned home, his mind at ease. Xiao Lingqing was definitely not a big shot in the military. This person couldn't be found online before. There was someone with the same name, but they weren't from Sucheng. They were a county magistrate in a small county, and their age didn't match. Xiao Ran had previously harbored doubts, wondering if Xiao Lingqing was involved in secret weapon research. Such an important figure, naturally, wouldn't be traceable online. But Xiao Chuchio, in an act of drawing a snake and adding feet, superfluous action, insisted on creating a Baidu entry for him, which became a self-incrimination. Xiao Ran was relieved. The claim about missiles locking onto their location and that missiles would strike if Xiao Lingqing didn't report safe passage for a day was purely to scare the Chong family. There was no other way. The Chong family had obtained guns at the time, even without Chong Lauer personally stepping in, who in the community wasn't afraid of the Chong family. Xiao Chuchio was indeed beautiful, and the Chong family must have had their eyes on her for a long time. So, with the apocalypse upon them and social order collapsing, would the Chong family still have reservations? What could scare the Chong family? Military missiles, of course. Most importantly, Xiao Lingqing had surprisingly known about the impending extreme weather in advance and led everyone to collect a wave of supplies. This naturally created a preconceived notion, leaving no doubt about his status as a big shot. So, how exactly did Xiao Lingqing know about the coming catastrophe? Xiao Ran smiled, picked up his walkie-talkie, tuned it to a frequency, and called out, Xiao Chuchio, do you hear me? Please respond. You just got back, and you already have something? A moment later, Xiao Chuchio's voice came through the walkie-talkie, sounding as if she was gritting her teeth. Xiao Ran chuckled. I'm very curious. How did your grandpa know about the coming catastrophe? Hiss, your grandpa isn't a reborn person, is he? He deliberately tried to trick her. You've read too many novels, Xiao Chuchio said coldly. Did you call just to tell me that nonsense? Huh, didn't I say? I want to know why your grandpa knew about the catastrophe, Xiao Ran reiterated. Xiao, however, merely said, Grandpa is a big shot in the military. Isn't it normal for him to receive notifications? TSK, I've clearly exposed it, but her lips are still sealed? With the missile threat gone, Xiao Ran was naturally in high spirits. In fact, after entering the Xiao family's house, he had carefully searched with his spatial perception. There were absolutely no satellite phones, and their cell phones weren't Huawei P or Mate 60 models. So, let alone making satellite calls, they couldn't even send satellite messages. What's your major? Xiao Ran suddenly asked. Xiao Chuqiu was slightly taken aback, not expecting Xiao Ran to ask such a question. Completely unprepared, she instinctively replied, Electronic information. Hey. Xiao Ran secretly thought, just as I suspected. How would an ordinary person create a Baidu by-key entry? Only someone with an internet-related major could do that. He wanted to install cameras in his villa and implement facial recognition to decide whether to shoot, call the police, or ignore intruders, and for that, he needed relevant talent. Wasn't Xiao Chuqiu exactly that? Of course, Xiao Ran wouldn't dare ask her to do this now. Even if Xiao Chuqiu agreed, could Xiao Ran truly trust her? What if she left a back door, and his machine gun turned on him? They had only just met today. Could Xiao Ran trust her? If he were that careless, he'd hardly have survived until today, even with his abilities. All right, we'll talk later. He was about to turn off the walkie-talkie. Wait, Xiao Chuqiu suddenly called out, hesitating a moment before saying, Thank you for the fruit. She might have been able to resist the temptation of other food and find a way to return it to Xiao Ran, unwilling to owe him such a favor. But the fruit, she couldn't help but be tempted. Xiao Ran simply smiled. All right, you owe me a favor. There'll definitely be a way for you to repay it later. You, shameless. Xiao Chuqiu suddenly cursed, then hung up. Xiao Ran was utterly bewildered. I still want you to help me set up an enemy/ally identification system for the manor later. So why are you calling me shameless? What did she misunderstand? This is truly inexplicable. Xiao Ran shook his head. He had given fruit to Xiao Lingchang originally because he was afraid that if Xiao Lingchang really was some old cadre who could mobilize missiles to strike, then giving him fruit would naturally be for the sake of establishing good relations. Even if he moved out immediately, it wouldn't stop him from knowing a big shot, which might be useful someday. Although it later proved not to be the case, the items had already been brought over, and Xiao Ran wasn't a stingy person, so he still gave them to the Xiao family. He considered it a gesture of gratitude towards a military person. Xiao Ran, dinner's ready. Han Yun's alluring voice drifted over. Xiao Ran replied, temporarily setting aside his thoughts. Lunch was quite lavish. Because the women had been working hard these past few days, doing physical labor, Xiao Ran naturally wouldn't treat them poorly. The ingredients he brought out were all good stuff. Large lobsters, king crabs, prime wagyu beef, and so on. These were normally only served for major celebrations, but in recent days, they were eaten casually. Even an emperor wouldn't starve his soldiers. However, after finishing their work this morning, all the doors and windows in the entire manor had been reinforced, especially the windows. What was the point of so many windows now? Was there any scenery to see? They were all sealed up tightly. Safety naturally came first. The women didn't exercise today because the intensity of their labor was already very high, and they didn't need any additional physical exertion. They all went to the sauna. Xiao Ran disliked saunas because he found them too stuffy and hot, so he went to exercise instead. Weighted running. Ordinary long-distance running no longer had any training effect. Xiao Ran was running with a barbell on his back, weighted at 200 kilograms. Even so, he didn't feel much difficulty. His physique was just too powerful. If I were a martial arts type ability user, what kind of strength and speed would I possess after being reinforced so many times? Xiao Ran felt a little terrified. If such an ability user came attacking, would he truly have time to react? The drawback of a martial arts type ability user is their singular ability. They only strengthen their body. But that's also where their terror lies. When strength is infinite and speed is limitless, what need is there for any flashy abilities? Just charge over, and a single punch will solve it. Xiao Ran felt a bit envious of martial arts type ability users, but after thinking it over, even if he had the chance to switch, he still wouldn't trade his spatial ability. From a practical enjoyment perspective, spatial storage was king. Moreover, wasn't the spatial gate powerful? What if I could bend the spatial gate into a spherical shape, or even just warp it into a curved surface? As long as it surrounds me, wouldn't no attack be able to harm me? And if I surrounded a target, unless that person never moved an inch, they would be pulled into my alternate dimension. Then even if you were strengthened 1 billion times, it would probably only lead to a dead end. Xiao Ran's eyes sparkled. He had found a direction for his efforts. With a clear goal in mind, Xiao Ran began to work hard. He continuously tried to warp the spatial gate. But after hundreds of attempts, the spatial gate remained unchanged, showing no sign of bending whatsoever. Xiao Ran didn't give up. This was just the beginning, after all. However, he didn't put all his energy into altering the spatial gate. He still dedicated a portion to training his two other abilities, spatial perception and spatial severing. Spatial severing was more geared towards offense, and as for Xiao Ran's personality, chuckles. He definitely prioritized defense. Only by staying alive could anything else be discussed. Theoretically, with spatial perception combined with a spatial gate, he could block any attack. As long as an attack entered the range of his spatial perception, he could detect it instantly, and opening a spatial gate was merely a thought away. How fast is thought? Exactly. What Xiao Ran trained was the coordination of activating spatial perception and then opening a spatial gate. Ability users all possess danger premonition, so as long as he mastered the use of these two abilities, even if a physically enhanced ability user launched a surprise attack on him, he should be able to react in time and open a spatial gate to protect himself. If an opponent was too fast and couldn't stop in time, he would simply win. He kept trying over and over again. Since keeping spatial perception continuously active consumed a lot of his power, Xiao Ran used it in an on-off manner. Although the visual feedback had a slight choppy feel, it was like a movie filmed at 120 frames per second dropping to 60 frames. Most people wouldn't notice the difference. The accuracy was indeed affected, but not significantly. However, this directly doubled the duration he could use spatial perception. After training for over 2 hours, Xiao Ran found his power was almost depleted. One last time. Spatial perception activated. It was somewhat like radar waves, but radar waves scanned by distance and displayed sequentially, no matter how fast. Spatial perception was different. Within 16 meters, everything appeared simultaneously. Time to rest, Xiao Ran was stunned. What the hell? He suddenly realized that in the three-dimensional mental map in his mind, the women, including Su Qingmei, had appeared. How was that possible? Weren't they in the sauna next door? How would he see them? The visual sensation was so real. He couldn't be so perverted as to imagine them in the sauna, out of thin air. Could he? After all, hadn't they just had their activities before he started training? Could it be? Xiao Ran's face lit up with ecstasy, and he activated spatial perception again. However, this time the beautiful scene from the sauna room did not appear. Spatial perception couldn't penetrate walls. That was common knowledge. Xiao Ran couldn't help but stare blankly. Was it really just his imagination, just now? That didn't make sense. For the past 2 hours, he had been completely engrossed in training, not thinking about anything related to women. So how could such an erotic hallucination appear after using spatial perception? Think back. Think carefully. Was there anything different? Yes. Xiao Ran's eyes suddenly gleamed. He closed his eyes and activated spatial perception once more. He felt as if he had become an omnipotent being. A massive three-dimensional map appeared in his mind, showing not only the gym, but also the room next door, as well as upstairs and downstairs. Within 16 meters of him, everything was visible, no matter the direction. What about the walls? They hadn't actually disappeared. Instead, they appeared in a faded, transparent way. The 9 women in the sauna were the same. Their bath towels could also be blurred and faded, allowing him to see through them at will, with just a thought. Had this damn thing evolved into X-ray vision? No. X-ray vision could only see in one direction, but he had a 360-degree, blind spot-free view. Spatial ability. Awesome. Xiao Ran continued. The 9 women instantly seemed as if they were sliced, their skin blurred, their muscles blurred, and he could clearly see their beating hearts. Holy crap. Holy crap. Holy crap. So, combined with spatial severing, couldn't he cut wherever he wanted? Before the apocalypse, if he combined these two abilities, couldn't he become the top surgeon? Cutting out tumors would be no problem. This was even more precise than minimally invasive surgery. He wouldn't even need to cut open the skin directly. As Xiao Ran indulged in wild thoughts, spatial perception automatically stopped due to the complete depletion of his power. Why hadn't he achieved the penetrating effect the first time? Because the second time he used it, he put more effort into it, meaning he consumed more power. An increase in consumption in exchange for a qualitative improvement. The consumption is triple the usual. This kind of X-ray vision can only be used at critical moments. Otherwise, it will easily drain all my power. Putting aside surgery, this upgraded spatial perception is incredibly useful now. What was it useful for? Finding gas stations. Xiao Ran could roughly determine the location of gas stations by comparing maps with real-world landmarks, but it was only approximate. Whether it was directly beneath his feet or how many meters off, he would only know by digging. But now the snow was about 7 meters deep. How long would it take to dig down to bottom? It was highly likely he'd dig for half a day, only to find he was off target and had to start digging again. What a pain. But now it was great. Once he reached the approximate location, a single use of spatial perception would instantly reveal where the oil tanks were, wouldn't it? Not a single bit of deviation. So useful. Great. This old man finally wouldn't have to worry about doing nothing every day. Xiao Ran couldn't hide his excitement, and with this excitement, he naturally felt invigorated. He took a mask from his spatial dimension, put it on, and entered the sauna room. Pushing the door open, he loudly declared, "Nobody move. This old man is here for a bit of mischief." Although a certain someone was wearing a mask, Su Qingmei and the others saw him in his true form every day. Weren't they familiar with his body? So, everyone just smiled without a word. Only one person was an exception. Zhou Yunsui. The little green tea girl let out a terrified shriek. "Help! Help! There's a pervert!" Xiao Ran roared with laughter, then hoisted the green tea girl onto his shoulder and walked off. Su Qingmei and the other women exchanged glances, suddenly filled with regret. The trick Xiao Ran played was indeed childish, but so what? He liked it. While they were still laughing at Xiao Ran for being childish, Zhou Yunsui had already started cooperating. How could Xiao Ran not like that? The little green tea girl wasn't just good at subtly harming others. Damn it, that green tea bitch got ahead again. Another night passed. The apocalypse entered its 46th day. The weather remained harsh, with accumulated snow as high as 2.5 stories. Due to temperatures of over -40 degrees Celsius, the snow showed no signs of melting, only becoming solid and hard. Yet, a large number of humans still survived. Although the food shortage was worsening, humanity, for now, stubbornly held on. In the early morning, Xiao Ran stood by the window, watching the rapidly dissipating fog, contemplating his plans for the day. Should he go out to find a gas station? Yes, go. What else is there to do at home? Run away. He mentioned it to the women, and they all insisted on coming along. They wanted to contribute too. Xiao Ran thought for a moment, then agreed. All right, let's all go. It'll prevent anyone from trying to steal the house while we're away. This was unlikely, as Xiao Ran had just wiped out the Chong family, who wouldn't be intimidated by that display of power. Still, it's better to be safe than sorry. If the house was left empty now, even if someone managed to force their way in, what could they do? Food? Water? Xiao Ran stored everything in his alternate dimension, only retrieving it for the women when he went out. After breakfast, everyone got into the car and set off. Oh wait, it was a boat. The hovercraft started, and soon roared away. Static crackled. That family left. Where did the Chong family go? Were they all killed inside their house? It's too eerie. The Chong family had so many guns. How could they be wiped out overnight? You hit the nail on the head. Overnight, while people are asleep, and with professional skills, it would be easy to succeed. Good thing we have old man Xia holding down the fort. That family should be afraid of a mutual destruction scenario. Over the walkie-talkie, voices spoke one after another. However, at this moment, someone threw a bucket of cold water on their optimism. I advise everyone, don't be so optimistic. It was Zhuang Jiachen. Why? Many immediately asked. If you were to say who had the most prestige in the entire community, it would undoubtedly be Xia Lingxing. As for who posed the greatest threat, it used to be the Chong family, but now Xiao Ran had taken their place. And if you were to ask who was the most resourceful, it could only be Zhuang Jiachen. In a way, he could actually influence others more than Xia Lingxing. Zhuang Jiachen said calmly, Old man Xia isn't actually a military bigwig, and Xiao Ran must have discovered this. How could that be? Exactly, if old man Xia wasn't a major figure in the military, how could he have gotten advance notice and told us to gather supplies? Didn't even the Chong family get scared by him? Everyone was confused. Zhuang Jiachen had always been shrewd. Why was he suddenly spouting nonsense? Zhuang Jiachen shook his head, though no one could see him. Xia Lingxing is definitely not a military bigwig. After the disaster, I specifically asked someone to inquire, and there's no one named Xia among the active or retired military bigwigs. Huh, everyone was stunned. After the disaster, they had followed Xia Lingxing's advice, stockpiled supplies in advance, and thus survived, becoming utterly convinced of his identity. Who would bother to specifically inquire? But then why didn't Zhuang Jiachen say anything earlier? Zhuang Jiachen explained, before, it was to intimidate the Chong family, which is why I kept it hidden. I didn't want any of you to be loose-lipped and let the Chong family find out. Otherwise, we would all face utter destruction. And the reason I'm saying it now is because Xiao Ran first grew suspicious, then went to the Xia family, and must have found corroborating evidence. For a moment, only static crackled through the walkie-talkies. No one spoke. Xiao Lingchen wasn't a bigwig after all. For now, they weren't worried that Xiao Ran would harm them, but rather that their last glimmer of hope was gone. If Xiao Lingchen were a military bigwig, would the country send people to rescue them? Possibly. If they rescued Xiao Lingchen, couldn't they also rescue them incidentally? After all, those who could afford, or rather obtain, villas here weren't just ordinary rich people. They all had various extensive connections, just not connections to the heavens. So, if they brought up their backing and their network, maybe they could be rescued along with him. But if Xiao Lingchen wasn't a military bigwig, then the country naturally wouldn't send anyone to pick them up, and this sliver of hope vanished. I'm stating this fact not to discourage everyone, but to make you all face reality, Zhuang Jiachen said solemnly. Everyone saw Xiao Ran leave in a hovercraft this morning, didn't you? At his words, many immediately became animated. A hovercraft? Where did that kid get it from? And with so much heavy snow, 6 to 7 meters deep, how did he dig out that hovercraft? That part's simple. He just parked the hovercraft in a garage or a similar place. After the snow stopped, he'd only need to dig a ramp at the entrance. Then the hovercraft could be driven right out. If we could get our hands on that hovercraft, we wouldn't be stuck just eating away at our reserves. Yeah, it's been over 40 days since we last stockpiled food. Our remaining supplies are getting low. So, we rob him. Zhuang Jichen coughed, gesturing for silence. First, we need to figure out what happened to the Chong family. That was at least 50 living people. How could they all just vanish without a trace? Even if Xiao Ran ambushed them, one person took out over 50 people. I ask you, aren't you afraid of an enemy like that? No one spoke. Their silence was an affirmative answer. What do we do then? We're going to face starvation soon. Someone finally spoke after a while. Zhuang Jiachen smiled. I only said we need to act cautiously, not sit around waiting to die. It's almost 50 days since the disaster, and there's been no national rescue. I estimate it's never going to happen. We must find a way to save ourselves. MHM, MHM, MHM. Many readily agreed. Exactly. My mom has diabetes, and her insulin reserves are almost gone. I can't just watch my mom die. My wife is due soon. Zhuang Jiachen cleared his throat again. Everyone calm down. We still have enough food to last a few days. So, use this time to interact with Xiao Ran as much as possible and figure out his background. As our ancestors said, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. How exactly did this Xiao Ran kill all those people from the Chong family? Before we figure that out, we absolutely cannot make a move unless it's a last resort, nor can we let Xiao Ran sense our hostility towards him. Everyone readily agreed. After all, who among them, having reached their current status and position, wasn't intelligent? Once Xiao Ran returns, we'll first test his attitude. Xiao Ran piloted his boat. The surroundings were vast and boundless, and this was on Taihu Lake. As long as he aimed in one direction and moved forward, did he really need to worry about traffic accidents? So, Xiao Ran boldly pushed the hovercraft to 40 miles per hour. Compared to his previous off-road vehicle, this speed was double. That was indeed quite daring. Driving fast meant he reached his destination naturally sooner. Once he reached an approximate location, Xiao Ran used his spatial perception to pinpoint the exact spot. Time to dig. How to dig? With an excavator, of course. This wasn't something Xiao Ran had prepared in advance. He hadn't expected such heavy snowfall later on, so he hadn't bothered. Instead, he had simply picked it up while collecting oil earlier. Might as well take it, since his space was vast anyway. Now it was coming in handy. Since he had already practiced via videos, Xiao Ran immediately got to work. Dig, dig, dig. After nearly 2 hours, he finally dug down to the oil storage area. That made things easier. With a touch of his hand, several oil tanks vanished one after another. My digging skills still need some work. If I had a physical combat type ability user helping me, or a fire elemental one who could just melt the snow, the speed would really pick up. But there are no ifs, though. What if Su Qingmei or one of the others gained an ability? Xiao Ran was actually a little uneasy. What if someone suddenly decided to turn on him? Though it's unlikely. They all know that only with me alive can they enjoy this good life. However, with time, affection grows, and they become increasingly dependent on me. I believe that one day, even if they're given great power, they won't want to leave me. Affection growing over time was one thing, But most importantly, he could provide the best material conditions, something no one else could replace. Even if my guess is correct, that becoming an ability user requires being struck by poisonous hail and awakening between life and death, I still need to experiment on others first, don't I? No rush, no rush. But if ability users could be cultivated artificially, that would be something else. In the future, if someone foolishly crosses my path, I'll patiently see if I can turn them into an ability user. Let's go to a gas station. Getting oil was tough now. Previously, most of his time was spent traveling. Now, he still spent a fair amount of time traveling, but the time spent digging through snow was even longer. As a result, after a day's work, he had only managed to clear out 4 gas stations. Home. He piloted the hovercraft home. Fortunately, it wasn't yet 4 o'clock, so it naturally hadn't gotten dark, and the heavy fog hadn't reformed. Xiao Ran took out food and had the women prepare dinner. The 9 women were all very happy today. Although they spent most of their time in the hovercraft, at least they had gotten out. Seeing the entire world covered in heavy snow broadened their horizons, making them feel as if their spirits had ascended. Moreover, they had collected some supplies today. Although they didn't have spatial abilities and could only use bags, these items were collected by their own hands, making each of them cherish them greatly. Even biscuits that they would now typically scorn. Each woman held on to what she had collected, carefully preserving it. They couldn't bear to eat or use them. These were items they had worked hard to find, and their very first haul, naturally making them memorable. It was precisely this day's scavenging trip that made the women realize Xiao Ran's importance even more. What good things could still be found now? In such low temperatures, many things had spoiled and were unusable, and food had completely frozen solid. Only things like pork, beef, and lamb could be thawed and cooked. What about vegetables? Seafood? Fruits? Therefore, Xiao Ran's ability to provide fresh food was unique in these times. With this realization, even the usually somewhat aloof Yu Nuantong, Jiang Yuning, and Su Xinran unconsciously changed, showing a touch more tenderness and affection toward Xiao Ran. However, before they could even have dinner, the walkie-talkie suddenly buzzed. Xiao Ran, Mr. Xiao, if you hear me, please respond. It was a man's voice. Xiao Ran thought for a moment, then answered the call. Get to the point, he said. He had no interest in beating around the bush. The other party was startled for a moment, then said, Mr. Xiao, I have a favor to ask you. I refuse. Xiao Ran directly turned off the walkie-talkie. What could they possibly ask for? It must be for supplies, or to borrow the hovercraft. He wouldn't agree to either. Yu Fei stared blankly at the walkie-talkie in his hand. He hadn't expected Xiao Ran to refuse so bluntly. After 3 seconds of stunned silence, he began to curse. After a while, he contacted the others on a different channel. Xiao Ran hung up without even hearing what I had to ask, he said. This made the dozen or so people on the other end of the walkie-talkie frown. If Xiao Ran were greedy, then such a person would have a weakness, and a weakness could be exploited. For instance, if Xiao Ran demanded money, special supplies, or took a fancy to someone's daughter or wife, they could just feign agreement, lure him out, and naturally have an opportunity to make a move. But Xiao Ran wouldn't listen, wouldn't even acknowledge them, and just hung up. So, how could they target someone like him, who hid in his house like a turtle retreating into its shell? It was difficult. Zhuang Jichen thought for a moment, then said, Old Yu, have your wife contact Xiao Ran. Yu Fei was startled, then his blood pressure rose. Old Zhuang, what do you mean by that? Nothing special, Zhuang Jichen said coolly. Just have your wife contact Xiao Ran. What do you have to lose? Yu Fei hesitated for a moment before agreeing. He called his wife over. Yu Fei had started from nothing, but after getting rich, he divorced his first wife and married an 18-year-old art student. However, his ex-wife hadn't fallen behind. She had gotten together with a young fitness coach. So, his current young trophy wife was only 22. After giving her a few instructions and adjusting the frequency, his young trophy wife spoke into the walkie-talkie. Hello, mister. Xiao Ran, are you there? There was no response. Yu Fei gave her a look, signaling her to continue. His young trophy wife kept repeating herself until her mouth was dry, but there was still no sound from the other end of the walkie-talkie. In a fit of pique, she threw the walkie-talkie on the ground and stomped her foot playfully, whining, Hubby, what kind of person is this? My mouth is completely dry from talking, and he still won't respond. Yu Fei chuckled. Normally, your mouth doesn't get dry so easily. Hubby, you're so naughty. His young trophy wife knew Yu Fei was making a lewd joke and deliberately pouted coyly. Yu Fei merely teased her to lighten the mood, then immediately said, Keep calling until he answers. All right, fine, his young trophy wife reluctantly agreed.